Hello, welcome back to Warriors Den podcast, episode 53. Today's guest is a gentleman by the name of Paul Johnstone. I met him many years ago in 2012. I believe we both sort of agreed it was probably then when we did an instructor course with CT707 founder Nir Maman. Paul is a Krav Maga expert, a Bujikan Ninjitsu Black belt at holding the highest rank he is able to attain, and a veteran as well as a police officer. His pedigree is phenomenal, and he lives in Australia, so all you Australian listeners and fans may love this one. You can reach Paul, by the way, if you want to train. Right now their website is down, but Street Edge Krav Maga International on Facebook. Best way to get a hold of him. But first, this podcast is brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, in particular our new website, www.utkmu.com, where we have put up for you our curriculum as we teach it here. Whether you're a student looking to expand your Krav Maga or an instructor looking to see how we have developed our curriculum, you are welcome to see. There is some free content, though it is limited at this time. I am a one-man show, of course, so I can only do so much at one time. There is our entire white belt curriculum up and most of our novice curriculum up. In the paid sections, you just go to the website and go to pricing and set up your pricing plan. Of course, you can access the free section, which at the moment is very limited because obviously the focus is on the other content. And down the road, we'll release our advanced curriculum publicly, but at this time, it will not be there. So you have something to look forward to. And of course, if you support this podcast, it's a great way to get it. So again, that is UTKMU.com. Now, of course, you can follow our regular stuff on Facebook, Urban Tactics Krav Maga, same on Instagram and on Twitter, which is just relaying everything else really is Urban Tactics KM. And of course, if you are in the Metro Vancouver area, our regular training website is www.urbantacticskm.com, and of course our blog, where my semi-weekly ramblings are posted, as well as this podcast, is www.utkmblog.com. Pretty sure urbantacticskramaga.com also redirects there, but you get the idea. Really, it's brought to you by our new website, utkmu.com. Anyways, check it out. And this was, I haven't done one this long in a long time because I'm getting back into this. So it was a great conversation with Paul. We talk about, his Krav Maga background, his ninjitsu background. We talked a little bit about global threats going on in the world, violence as stuff, students, as far as what we want to see our students, what we expect. It's always interesting to see other instructors' perspectives as well on this. So it's a great listen. 2.5 hours today, so give or take, quite the one. So enjoy with Street Edge Krav Maga founder in Australia, Paul Johnstone.
You're listening to The Warriors Den, brought to you by Urban Tactics Krav Maga, turning lambs into lions.
So I have with me Paul Johnstone from Australia. I met him many years ago at a Nir Maman Instructor Seminar, or course rather, and he's an interesting character, ninja master, Krav Maga expert, military expert, but I'll let you tell me a little bit about your background, your military, martial arts, etc., how you got into Krav Maga.
No worries, Jonathan, and thanks, mate, for the invite. And it's great to be here, mate. Great to talk to you, and great to see you after many years. We went back to, was it 2012? 2012, I think it was. So,
one of the earlier courses, I think.
That's it, mate. Yeah, mate. I joined the Australian Army in 1985. I did a total of 15 years in the Army. I then left and went into the corporate security side of the world. And then pretty much as soon as 9/11 happened, I signed up for the Australian Federal Police. And after a long, very, very long process of selection, I was selected as a federal agent. And I then spent 10 years in the Australian Federal Police as a federal agent. I left there in 2012 and pretty much left there on a Monday, and I was in Kabul on the Friday, and decided to go to Afghanistan and take up a role there at the Australian Embassy as a private security contractor. In relation to my martial arts, mate, pretty much I started doing karate when I was about 11 years of age, and I was being bullied at school, and I rode my bike past this hall one day and I saw the sign, decided to go and check it out. So I did karate for about 6-7 years before I turned 17. And in that period of time, I did Kempo-kan karate and Shotokan karate. And then pretty much as soon as I turned 17, I went off to the army. So I had that 6-7 years of experience in karate. However, it wasn't preparing me, or hadn't prepared me for the street. So in late '85, myself and some other soldiers, we got into a pretty nasty street fight with some local guys down outside Melbourne, Victoria, and as a result of that, mate, I got my head kicked in pretty bad. There was 8 of us, and we were up about 60, 70 local guys that didn't really like us. They didn't like us being in their town. They didn't like us in uniform. They didn't like us with the girls. So we got ambushed one night quite bad at a dance.
And I just interject. I should say you're quite a big guy too. So for that to happen is quite intense.
Yeah. And one of the reasons, mate, we were outnumbered. And but what was really interesting when we first went to that hall, I'd already started thinking to myself, something doesn't seem right here. There's not enough guys here. There's not enough men. There's more women than men. Mm-hmm. And I thought to myself, this is very strange. And I actually said to some of my guys, I don't feel comfortable. I think we need to leave. And unfortunately, because of alcohol in their system and everybody's having a great time, mate, a short time later, mate, we were ambushed, and look, as a result of that, mate, I received some serious head injuries. We fought our way as much as we could. One of our guys was glassed, and it was a pretty messy situation and stuff. But we held our own for a short period of time, and as long as we could until we were outnumbered. But mate, as a result of that, I was in hospital for about 6 days, and quite nasty head injuries. And when I came out of that, one of the first things I actually realised was that the karate hadn't worked. And it wasn't so much the actual skills or the knowledge there, it was the methodologies. And it was all very linear. So at the time, even though I was basically fighting back and some of the techniques I was using were very effective, what actually happened, mate, was it was all linear and I wasn't moving. Yeah. And it's something I learned many years later, mate, and so as a result of that, I ended up having a house brick. It was like a large lump of brick hitting the side of my head. Mm-hmm. And again, that set me up. And I look back now in reflection, Jonathan, I think it was a good thing that happened because over the many, many years since, it's the one thing that stayed in my head was the importance of scanning. And it's something I emphasize with my students all the time, the fact that you need to scan, because even though you think the threat's over, the threat will come from anywhere. So, and on that particular night, I didn't scan because I'd never been taught, from a martial arts point of view to scan. So that really set off the journey for me, mate, to find a system or methodologies, mate, that I could actually use, both in my military career, just in my personal life, in all those types of situations. So, mate, that's kind of where it all started back in late 1985 for me, for this journey towards Krav and Ninjitsu.
Where did you start your Krav journey originally?
Mate, that was quite interesting because in 1999, I left the military and I went into the corporate security world, and I basically got headhunted. I'd been in security for on the side for a long period of time, and I received this call one day from a recruiting firm, and they said, "Look, we're interested in recruiting you for a position. It's an executive position. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "Who's the client?" And they wouldn't tell me who the client was. And subsequently, the client ended up being one of the most one of the most significant, one of the most instrumental Jewish families here in Australia. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, that was probably my first journey into the Jewish community, into the Krav Maga world. I'd always kind of had known about that from afar, but I'd never had that opportunity, within. So after several interviews and that, I received I was offered the position as an executive protection position. And that was probably the start of it, mate, because that's when I really was exposed to the Jewish community. But the culture, more in the culture, and obviously I studied more about the history, and that's when I was first introduced to Krav Maga. And at that time, mate, it hadn't really hit the shores of Australia. It wasn't really known like it is now. Mm-hmm. So I feel very privileged in that sense, and very blessed, mate, that I was actually training with people and interacting with people that had served in the IDF and that had served in various specialist units, had received Krav Maga training, and subsequently they had passed it on to me. And because of my own interest, we were able to share a lot. And I'd been doing ninjitsu for a long period of time at that time, and some other military combatives and stuff. But that was my first exposure to it, mate. And again, I look at everything in my past, mate. I'm very privileged to have had that opportunity.
Yeah, I would say so, because if I remember correctly, I'm not that old, but at that time they were still being very secretive about it, the Israelis, and trying not to take it too. It wasn't really till like the 90s, even late 90s, where it started really taking off.
100%, mate. Yeah. You're 100% correct there, mate. That was in 99, and as I said, it really hadn't really. I'd never known about that before. I hadn't heard of it before. Even the word Krav Maga, and I thought to myself, that's, what is this? So I was just like a sponge then, mate. I took as much in as I could.
Yeah.
And the whole Israeli the whole Israeli martial arts concept, was very still, as you said, it was very secretive to the West in many cases, and certainly here in Australia. There were people here that had trained in it when they'd done their service in the Defence Forces and returned to Australia. But it was actually a really interesting time for me, mate.
Yeah, that makes sense if it's 99, because Imi passed away in 98, and that's where it was free for all, politically, and everyone kind of just no, we're teaching, and they all sort of went wherever they went, and the politics of Krav Maga is no different than any other martial art, unfortunately.
That's exactly right, mate. Yeah. And next minute you've got people walking around with, that just because they're wearing a set of camouflage trousers and a black T-shirt, everybody's an expert.
Well, I mean, as someone, I wasn't in special forces, but I did serve, in IDF, and I did have the opportunity to be on the counterterrorism base for a few weeks when I was doing sniper school. And you can really see that it is a bit of a myth that the Israelis created, that just because you were in the IDF that you're all of a sudden a Krav Maga expert. Because in the infantry, I probably had about 10 lessons, most of which were focused around my rifle as a combative weapon, and anything else I had already known as a civilian when I was training before I joined. And, I get the occasional student who's still asked, everyone's deadly in the IDF. I'm like, well, if they have a gun, yeah. The actual elite guys are very few and far between. And those are the guys like Matkal and Sheatet and Duvdevan and units like that. They're the ones who get the training, and very few people are actually in those units. So it's a bit of a myth unless you know for sure where they came from, whether they actually know it at a high level or not. I think it's more marketing.
I agree with you, mate. Yeah, and I've found that too throughout my journeys around the world, and even here in Australia. Just because, and with full respect to these guys that have served, it's not taking away anything from the fact that they've served, but it seems to be that even if you've just done your compulsory service, the fact that you might have done a few classes automatically gives you that ability to say, I was in the IDF, and I know Krav Maga. And I think that, as you said, unfortunately, too many people use that for marketing, and I guess over the years too, Jonathan, up until I met yourself, and did the course with Nir. I had been in other organisations. I'd done other training programs, other instructor courses with Krav Maga, but there was still something there that was missing for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't until I saw a video actually of Nir back in, must have been 2000 and I think it was in 2006. I saw a series of videos, and I thought to myself, this guy has the right mindset. This guy's got the same mindset as me, or similar, or this is a guy that I want to kind of connect with because it seems that he thinks the same way I think about this stuff. And then at the time, I remember contacting Nir. I was actually I was on operations in the Solomon Islands at the time in 2007 with the Australian Federal Police. And I remember being in contact with Nir. And if my memory serves me correct, he was actually, I think he might have been in Gaza at the time, because I remember we were both on operations at the time. And I actually said to him, I said, look, I'd love the opportunity to come and train with you. I love what you do. I like your stuff. I like the fact that you're straight to the point with it. Mm-hmm. And then subsequently, over many, many years of being in contact with Nir and just discussing things, talking, then I had the opportunity to late 2012, after I got back from Afghanistan, to go to the US and do the course with you guys. So
I can't remember because I did about 3 of his courses. What location were we in when we did?
We were in LA, mate.
That was the LA.
Yeah, because I remember it really clearly, mate, because the airlines lost my luggage for about 4 days. So I think I was wearing the same clothes and buying stuff locally. And it was in LA, mate.
Because I did one with him in Connecticut and another one in Buffalo, New York, when he was still regularly offering them.
Oh, okay. Yeah. And look, and that course, mate, obviously meeting Nir and then have the opportunity to really kind of interact with him, personally, and then with the group of guys that were there. Like, I remember, yourself, there's a stack of other great guys there. And that was, for me, that was almost like kind of coming home. You know what I mean? It was like, I thought, this is what I've been looking for such a long period of time. I've been trained, I've trained with other people who are very, very highly skilled and very knowledgeable, but it was, to me, it was the mindset, because I'm very much into the mindset. And that was that really opened my eyes. It did. And from there on in, that's kind of where my journey's kind of taken me with Krav Maga.
Yeah, and I know for me too. I think that was my first course I did, and it changed my approach as well. I've been with some other organizations too. Like now, I'm basically independent, but I associate loosely with a few. And but it just changed that really concept-based teaching as opposed to technique-based teaching, which I'd seen in other organizations. And they do talk about the standard 12 original tenets at Krav Maga and stuff, but they're not necessarily applying them. And, I can just say anecdotally, at least in the US, I don't know, Europe's probably a bit different to Australia too, is, when I go to various schools and I see what's being produced and I'm just like, if they're really assaulted, I don't know if they'll be able to fight through it, because they don't necessarily have the conceptual idea of what to do before or after during the technique. What if the technique fails? You get a lot of that, the what if questions that drive me nuts.
100%, mate. Yeah. And I think it's universal, mate, to be honest, because I'm the same. I've been to, many other organizations. I was involved in KPAP. I did a KPAP instructor's course. I've done a lot of seminars with different people from Israel and throughout the world. And probably the two most significant people for me in the Krav Maga world is Nir and Itagur, because I had the opportunity to train with both. And again, I like their mindsets. And I've been to so many different places and watched it, and I thought to myself, like you, Jonathan, these people are training their students to die, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah,
that's what they're doing. They're training them to die, because what they do is, to me, what they're doing is they're training their students for the next rank. Mm-hmm. That's all they're doing.
Yeah,
they're preparing them for the next rank, and a lot of these people, unless you've had some background, some experience with combatives, with violence in particular. It's very hard to teach somebody the concept of a violent attack if you don't understand the psychology of a vulnerable attack yourself. And so what I see is a lot of people pulling punches and pulling strikes, and they're puffing and panting. They're kind of, they think they're having a workout, but that's all it is. To me, it's just they're going through the motions.
Yeah.
They're not actually training for survival, mate.
Yeah, that's one of the things, like in my testing at my school, like I'm pretty Canadian about the day-to-day training, although I push them, but the testing is hard to the point where a lot of people do the first rank and they never come back because they're like, I don't want to do the next test. And to me, I'm like, that's okay as long as you understand your limits so that you're more willing to avoid fights or avoid violence. Because, if I have, say, 100-pound student and they're saying, oh, this technique didn't work, and I have to say, it's not the technique. I'm sorry if you can't get around physics. Like, if you don't go balls to the walls and avoid and all that, there's only so much techniques you're going to do if your attacker is 250 pounds,
100%. Yeah.
Like getting people to realize the reality. Now, of course, a 100-pound girl can fight off a 250-pound guy if they know what they're doing. But I'll always say you need to train a lot more than the guy who's 180 pounds because you need to compensate for that. And when you really challenge people like that, I find they pull back because, unfortunately, some people have gotten used to that weekend warrior seminar type thing.
Yeah.
Like, I know how to defend myself. I'm like, no, you got to keep doing this for 5, 10, 20 years.
Definitely, mate. Definitely. Because if you don't, the old concept, if you don't use it, you lose it. Yeah. And you know what? To me, what was interesting, and it's interesting you said you're independent, because I'm the same now, and that was as a result of Nir, because I remember when we did that course, and Nir, when he was issuing the certificates and stuff, and he spoke very nicely, very highly of myself, and I've always appreciated that because it kind of it gave me that sense of understanding that, you know what, yeah, we're up there with the big names, all the so-called big names through the marketing. And so when I came back to Australia, mate, on the way back, I decided to be independent, but with that link with Nir, and as I said, with the really the good people and the good network of people that were like-minded professionals. And that's what I wanted to do, was link with like-minded professionals like yourself and other guys that you've served. You understand reality, you understand the real world, and it's not into all the BS. So when I came back to Australia, mate, consequently, I'd actually already had enrolled in it was a weekend seminar with a very prominent, highly ranked grandmaster of a Krav Maga system, which I won't name. And mate, I went to do this weekend seminar, and I remember I was only there for about 3 hours on the first day, and I thought, this is bullshit. This is just total crap what this person's teaching these people. And there would have been about 70 in the class that day in the seminar. And I remember this young girl, she would have been about 15, and she put her hand up, she asked a question. Now, she was up against this big guy, and she said, about this technique. And he said, and the response was, this will work for everybody. Mm-hmm. No matter your size or your sex, it'll work for everybody. And basically that guy lost me there and then. Because I thought to myself, if you're not teaching these people to adjust and compensate for this and other options, well, it's pretty sad. And all you're doing is, again, you're training people to die. And I looked at the actual so-called grand master of this system, of this Krav style, and he looked very tired. He looked like he'd done a world tour. He looked very tired. And to me, it was just cash in. It was all ka-cling. It was all about the money and not so much about imparting knowledge and skills. Mm-hmm. So, and I'd only just come from LA, mate, about a week before, training with Nir and everybody there. And I looked at this person, I thought to myself, you know what, this is just, and that planted a seed for me. So our motto with Street Edge Krav Maga International is, we train for the real world, not the bullshit world.
Yeah, because, I should just throw in there, that's your Krav Maga organization.
Yeah, mate, yeah. And as I said, although I'm independent, I'm still linked with, with very, 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 very high-ranking and very proficient professionals, mate. As I said, and I'm always grateful, and I always represent Nir. And as I said, Ike Gul is the same. Two very, very, highly regarded people for me. And And after that seminar, mate, I basically did a few more hours, and I thought to myself, I've got to leave. I can't stay here. And on that seminar was a colleague of mine that had served in Afghanistan with me, and we both looked at each other and we thought, this is just crap. This is just, you're training people for nothing at all. You're not training them for self-preservation. You're not training them to protect themselves. You're training them to literally die. Yeah. So I excused myself from that seminar, and I said to him, I don't want a refund. Full credit to everybody. I said, but I'm sorry, I'm leaving because this is not for me.
Yeah, and I've heard that a few times after people have with Nir, with other organizations. I excused myself and just said, look, I can't do this. They offered me a 10-visit pass, a 10-visit training card for free. I said, look, no thanks. And then they asked me, is this your first time to Krav Maga? I said, look, I told them, I said, I've just finished doing an instructor program in the US with Nir Maman. And they said, who? I said, there you go. I said, maybe you should go and check him out and have a look at the difference between what he's teaching and this shit that this bloke's teaching. Because what you're getting taught from your so-called grandmaster is just shit. Yeah.
And
although the funny thing, I'll just say that in the general Krav Maga world, like the average student knows extremely little about the lineages, the history, the other organizations. Yeah. And I've caught a few schools with with their pants down, they don't, anyone other than maybe IMI, they have no clue. And it's my organization, and don't talk to anyone else. So it's like,
exactly. Everybody's exactly, mate. And you know what, mate? It just, to me, that was just I guess that was the catalyst for me with everything in relation to Krav Maga. And that really set about my journey to do what we're doing now, mate. And, and as I say, no disrespect to anybody else. They're training for their reasons. As I said, over the last 20 years, I've had opportunities to train for a lot of people, a lot of prominent people, a lot of people from Israel, a lot of people from overseas. And I'll always be, respectful to them, but at the same time, it doesn't mean I have to agree with what they're teaching, because my mission is to train people to be able to survive, not to get to the next rank, or not to. There's nothing wrong with rank. Don't get me wrong. Our rank testing is very, very extreme, hard. Like you're saying before, mate. A lot of people they don't like the way I test, because we do it. It's very, very harsh. However, reality is very harsh, and violence is very harsh, and that's what I try to get my guys to understand. So, so that's kind of pretty much where my journey's gone, mate.
Yeah, that's pretty good. I will like to touch on the ninjitsu thing in a bit, but before that, I think because we were talking about ranking, there's that whole debate in the Krav Maga world about ranking, whether you should have it or not. What are your thoughts on that?
Mate, up until about 2 years ago, to me, rank wasn't important. What was important was the and I go back to the physical preparation, the mental preparation, the tactical preparation. To me, the rank testing was, the end result was your competition or your test is that day on the street, that day in your home when somebody breaks in, that day when you're confronted with violence. To me, that was your test. And what we're doing is preparing you as best as we can to get to that point, so that it's not you're not freezing. You're just going to react naturally. But over the years, a lot of people, obviously, I guess through other organisations, people come to me and say, "Hey, Paul, I want to train with you. What's your rank system?" And when I've told them we don't have a rank system, it's kind of been counterproductive, because I want to train and get rank. So I've kind of resisted it for a long time, but I started to change my mind a little bit and think to myself, well, I don't want to make it the most essential part of our curriculum, but at the same time, I believe in giving people credit and rewarding for their hard work. Mm-hmm. And I guess as humans, mate, everybody likes to have acknowledgement.
Here's your gold score. Yeah, I totally get that. For me, it's I think ranking's a necessity, and the reason why is humans. We are, the human condition is what I find is, as you talked about the reality of violence, is as instructors, we have to actually manage their expectations of their ability to deal with violence. And while a rank is just a milestone, it's not necessarily a recognition of skill per se, because you can get wild variation in skill at any level. It still kind of lets that person know, like if I hold someone back and keep them at white belt for 3-4 years, I'm trying to tell them something like, you need to avoid violence at all costs, versus someone who can progress. It's okay, now you're making progress, you know where you're at, you kind of have an understanding of what you can and cannot do, hopefully. Of course, business-wise, this is not great, but I'm not going to sell out, because, I've had people come and, I had a situation many years ago. I respect this head of an organization too. I respect him as a person immensely, not a fan of how he runs things per se. And, I met a bunch of individuals through one of his seminars. And then what had happened is that locally, it turned out that Vancouver was the headquarters in Canada for Moni Isaac's organization.
Yep.
And then once everyone realized Moni Isaac was a fraud, and that whole thing fell apart, and these other individuals had met me through this other organization, they all came to me, being the local, hey, I want to get certified, I want to be ranked. I'm like, that's cool. It's going to take you a year, because I need you to get up to date in the way I'm doing things, and I need to make sure you can mimic what I'm doing. If you just want a weekend certificate, I have zero guarantees that you're not just going to go right back to doing things the way you were not. And of course, what do you think all these people told me?
Yep.
They're like, I'm not doing that. I already hold ranks and all this. And it's like, okay, but if you want to do what I'm doing, you got to teach what I'm doing.
That's it, mate. That's exactly
people don't ever want to do that. I would never go to an organization, even another Krav Maga organization, and demand a rank or an instructor thing. I'm going to go through what they want. Whether I teach that down the road is up to me, but I'm still going to do their thing, because that's the way, I think it needs to be. But most people are not interested in doing the work, I think.
Mate, Jonathan, you're 100% there, mate, and that's one of the reasons. What you just said, mate, I find that, and it's all because ego gets caught up, and unfortunately, ego will get people killed too. And I have no problems at all, mate. If I want to start a new training, if I want to start training somewhere, in a different system to cross train, I have no problems whatsoever, mate, of going back and putting a white belt on or something like that, or going back from zero. If you don't have that mindset, then and I tell my students all the time to always remain humble, to stay safe, train often, and always remain humble. And the most important thing to me is to remain humble all the time, because if you don't remain humble, and I was humbled back in 1985, mate, when I had the literally, when I was bashed severely, because up until that point, after having done karate for just under 7 years, and having 2 black belts and 2 different karate systems, I thought, oh well, I must be okay. I must know what I'm doing. But I learned real fast that night, mate, that by not scanning, by not moving, and that basically you get your humble attitude knocked out of you if you're not humble, mate. So from that night, I'd learned to become humble very, very quickly, and never assume, never think to yourself, you're better than anybody, or never expect that, because you've got a rank. I tell my students all the time, just because you've got rank doesn't mean you're going to survive. What's going to allow you to survive is your mindset, and that's what's going to allow you to survive. Because if you have that will to survive, then you can survive. Yeah. And so one of the things we do too, mate, for ranking is I might only have 2 designated rank testing per year. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, mate, I've gone through a whole year without actually doing any rank testing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But what I do, mate, the way I do it is this: if I say, right, we're going to have a rank testing on this particular date, people are preparing for it. So their mindset is that they're preparing for it. Mm-hmm. Where what I do, mate, is I will smash my students in, through the training, through the physical side and the mental side, and I will go through a period of time, maybe 3, 4, 5 months, where the training is very, very physically demanding. And for those that do exceptionally well, at the end of the class one night, I might call them out and just present them with their rank.
Yeah.
When they least expect it.
Yeah.
And to me, and to me, mate, that is a much more rewarding experience for both myself and for them, because they're not aware of it. They're not expecting it. They go there with no preconception ideas. They have no pre-expectations, mate, that they're going to go there that night do a rank testing. They just go there as it's just another class. I'm going to go and train. I'm going to give it 100%. I'm going to do as hard as I can and learn as much as I can. And, mate, to me, I get more satisfaction from rank testing doing it that way.
Yeah, that's kind of like the standard sort of jiu-jitsu model as well, like Brazilian jiu-jitsu. With most schools will just, hey, here's your next rank, and you're not expecting it at all. And
that's how we do it in the Bujinkan world too, mate. That's how we do our ranking that way too.
Yeah, I think there's merit to both, depending, like, because I do actual like tests and I schedule. Yeah. What I will tell people is, if you ask me to do your test, or you tell me you're ready to do your test, I'm not letting you do your test.
Yeah.
I'm putting you back. You gotta, I'll ask you when I feel you're ready. And it's not, that aspect is not sort of set in stone. Like, I do have my minimums, but let's say someone comes with an immense martial arts background. I'm just going to, run them through a curriculum enough to do the test so they're aware of it. And, I usually will cut their hours requirements, versus someone with zero skill and they're not very physical. They're going for much longer, right?
Of course. Yeah, definitely, mate. Definitely.
With the lower ranks, I tend to, it's a lot less time. But once they get to sort of the yellow-orange belt, it's like, I just wait, because that's where they, understand the fundamentals, but they really need to put the time in to develop the skills. And for me, I separated the curriculum. Like, our white belt is the basics, punching, kicking, moving, and more importantly, thinking. I push critical thinking a lot. And then once they move up into the novice ranks, we start actually looking at a lot of what Nir taught, for example, a lot of the basic, like wrestling, judo, kickboxing, boxing, to increase their combatives and expanding on knife stuff. And then once they get the green belt, I separated it up there into the professional application. Right. In most Western countries, you're not using a gun for self-defense. So for me, I separated it for, I'm in Canada, so I have to be careful legally a little bit. That's where I was like, oh, you want to learn all the cool stuff you saw on YouTube? Now you're ready for it. Right. Now that I know you can punch, you can think, to run, what you're capable of. Now we can start. Because I saw a video the other day, actually. It's obviously this guy knew how to do a firearms disarm, because he went for it as someone had a gun in his face. And he missed. And he was very lucky that his reaction after missing the disarm was just to turn around and slowly walk off. And he's lucky that the guy holding the gun was bluffing. It was more of an intimidation factor. And I use that as an example of, if you screw up that disarm you learned in a weekend and you don't know what to do next, you're screwed.
You're dead, mate.
So I like to really build people up, because otherwise I find people tend to be a bit delusional about what they can and cannot do. And I'm quite happy with the results I've been getting. Like some of my higher belts, I only have so far up to green belts, because I'm that strict as well with ranking. But I'm the ones that have stuck around, I'm seeing the reactions. Like, I can't sneak up on them anymore. And I'm like, this is awesome. Great. I'm getting exactly what I want to develop in people. So it's interesting, like, on the note of that, because, I have few instructors like Nir, for example, and Amit Himmelstein, if you know who he is, they're like, no ranks, no ranks.
No rank, I'm
like, I don't know about that, because I find that aside from the human psychology, is the Israelis forget this, is a lot of the guys they train in the military and police, they're what I would consider the top 10 or 15% of physically capable human beings. I can attest to that, because though my students may think I'm an athlete, I am not an athlete. I do what I do because I have to, right? I have to lead by example and be able to keep up to the best of my abilities. But I was never the athletic kid, pick last in gym. And for me, the military experience was extremely difficult physically, right? So I find is that you get these guys who are themselves elite athletes and mentally strong individuals, and they're used to dealing with mentally strong individuals who are elite athletes. And I have found across organizations, it doesn't always translate very well into the civilian world. And I think the Israelis haven't really figured out how to make that transition very well. Because when all of a sudden you're dealing with, like, I'm not like, I will have certain, I'm not going to lower my standards because people can't do what I'm teaching, I'll just say, maybe go hire a personal trainer first and come back, which that doesn't happen very often. But it's realizing that I'm not working with the best of the best, and I need the time to develop them to the point where now they can do,
Yes.
a thing. And an example was one of the organizations I'm pretty close with right now is the IKF. I mentioned to meet, I was actually supposed to go to Israel, but then COVID happened. And I went down there with 3 of my students, all orange belts at the time. And there was us and then this, a school there. And as far as I could tell, and no disrespect to the students of the instructor who hosted, because he's a wonderful person and he's very good himself, but I think my students were at just a much higher level than what was there, because I'm like pushing them and holding them back and driving them. And really it's working on that mental and aspect and like the conceptual aspect, because they really understood and they picked it up quick and they weren't confused. Because, when you go from one system to another, it's a little bit different. So it can be tricky.
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting you said that, Jonathan, because that's something too that I, like you said, and maybe for people like yourself and myself and those that have served in either military or policing or both, whatever, you have this kind of level of expectation with your students that you want them to be at, because you know that you want to get the best from them. You want to give them the very best that you can, because you want them to be as good as they possibly can be, no matter what their backgrounds are. Yeah. And for me, that's what I try to really emphasize with my students is, and I tell them, I don't care if you've been in the military, I don't care if you've been in the police, I don't care if you've had my background, but what I want to do is give everything I possibly can to give you every bit of advantage, mate, when violence comes knocking on your door.
Yeah.
And be it in your home, be it on a trip overseas, be it, you can be anywhere, to prepare them for when it happens. So, I do. I make no apologies to my students, and I say to them all the time, I'm doing this. You may not understand why I'm doing it, so ask me why I'm doing what I'm doing. And I'm doing it because I care about you. I do it because you are paying for a service, and I want to give you the very highest level of service that I possibly can. And at the same time, I want to build warriors. I want to build people to take them to the highest level they possibly can, whilst also ensuring that they remain humble. Yeah. And I've noticed that quite often I'll get new students that come and join, and they've maybe trained with one of the other big name brands of Krav Maga. And just one example, I had a lady just start with me about 3 weeks ago, and she'd trained for about 8 months at another Krav Maga organization. And on her very first night, one of the, and this happens a lot, and as she left, she said to me, she said, Paul, I learnt more in an hour and 15 minutes with you tonight than what I did in 8 months with that other guy.
Yeah, that's common.
It is, mate. Yeah. And I said to her, I said, well, look, that's not being, that's not kind of slagging or slandering the other guy. And I said, so explain to me, in what do you mean? And she even said to me, the basic contact of scanning. She said, I'd never been taught to scan before.
Yeah.
And I think
that's actually quite shocking, because that's, to me, it's pretty standard in Krav Maga.
It is. It's supposed to be. But again, the number of people, and see, Jonathan, for me, the concept of scanning, and we see it in other systems, people turn their head left and right, but that's not scanning to me. Yeah. That's just going through the motions. Mm-hmm. So what I will do sometimes in my classes, I never introduce live weapons into the class, but what I will do is I may nominate somebody to stand off to the side of the class, or I'll stand off to the side of the class, and I'll actually hold a live blade I'll take, a live blade, and I'll just stand there and hold it.
Yeah.
And see how long it takes for my students to actually pick up the fact that I've got a blade and call it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good idea. Maybe I should take that as well. Something I do often when students are sparring.
It's the same methodology of firearms. When you're training firearms, don't just turn left and right. You need to scan properly. You need to be moving and scanning and checking your surroundings. So I do that. And this young lady said to me, I'd never been taught that. I'd never been taught to scan like that. I'd never been taught to scan in general. Mm-hmm. And she just said to me, just everything else that we did tonight, all the other stuff, I've never done that before. Mm-hmm. And I said to her, well, this is standard for what we do. This is just part of how we train. So, I get that a lot, mate, where people come from other systems. And another lady, she came to me last year and she said she'd trained with one of the big brands, and she was basically sparring. It was just because we have contact, mate, and she said, I've never had contact. It's always been pulling punches. I said, what you've really been trained to do is just, if you get attacked on the street, you've been trained to pull punches, and that's it.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, one thing I do with scanning is when students are sparring, I'll often have a random person just attacking.
Yeah.
I can tell usually it's the higher ranks because they've learned, is the ones who start circling away while both dealing with their sparring partner and keeping the other opponent away, tells me they're the ones doing the scanning. Moving appropriately. Obviously, lower ranks don't because they need to get their head around sparring first. But I can tell when the people they finally get it. They don't just wait for the person to attack. Even though my instruction was, you might get attacked sometime, deal with it. What I really want to see them do is avoid it completely. And usually, when they get up the ranks, they start doing that. You'll see them throw a kick and then move around and get the sparring partner again. And then it's very satisfying as an instructor to see when they finally, because I can tell them, don't just do what I'm telling you to do, use your brain. But that's not everyone's going to pick that up. And then when it actually translates, it's very satisfying for sure.
100%, mate, yeah. And one of the other things we do too, mate, which we really emphasise, which I don't see very often, that's self-assessment. After the actual conflict, and I train my guys all the time. I say to them, there's three parts of this. There's the before, during, and after the attack. Mm-hmm. And if you don't understand how to deal with it afterwards, if you're not doing self-assessments, you can bleed out very quickly. And and so I teach them to prepare themselves psychologically after the attack, how to speak to emergency services, what to say under stress, how to do a self-assessment at the same time, where to look for. So the tactical medicine side of things comes into our training quite a lot too. It's very heavily it's a huge part of our training, mate. Because I want my guys to understand that it's not like in the gym or in the dojo where you just you do that and then it's all good. I want them to know how to check themselves out, how to check their friend or their family member out to see if they're bleeding out, and especially low light conditions. So we do a lot of training, mate, in low light conditions. I use a lot of sound. I use a lot of distractions. Mm-hmm. I've even in the past filled the room full of smoke. And with a smoke machine, and then put them through, some pretty hard stuff, just to get them prepared for as many possibilities that they could encounter. Yeah. And I say to my guys all the time, I'm not training you just for downtown Brisbane. I'm training you. You could be on a Kentucky tour overseas. You could be on a trip overseas to the UK. You could be in the States. You could be in South America. And a lot of my students who have trained with me over the years have been to these places, and I say to them, I'm not teaching just for a violent attack. I'm talking about terrorism. I'm talking about any type of situation you might find yourself in, where you need to protect yourself and your loved ones, be it either physical or even just being aware situationally. So it's a really holistic approach, mate, to the way I teach it, mate. And I guess
certainly should be. I think it's
But unfortunately, sorry, mate.
Oh yeah, no, I just saying because I'm in Canada. We're in Vancouver. It's very safe here. Yeah, we notorious downtown east side downtown with the drug addicts and stuff. But I tell people all the time, like, if you think this city is dangerous, you're out of your minds. Like, if I'm saying, how I deal with a situation here is a little bit different than how I'm going to deal with a situation for whatever reason I might find myself, say, in the Republic of Congo, it's going to be radically different.
100%, mate.
The level of violence and willingness to do violence is going to have to go up in a lot of other places in the world.
Definitely, mate. And if you don't prepare your students for that mindset, then if they're ever in that situation, they don't understand it. So that's why I constantly say to my guys, I'm training you right now here in Brisbane, but you could be anywhere in the world and I talk about the different levels of threats in different countries, and and what are the potential threats in different countries that they might encounter. But I say to them, you need to be able to go to any place in the world and maintain that mindset of survival, because if you don't, if you're only training for downtown Brisbane, and Brisbane where I live, mate, is relatively safe too. We have a fair bit of shit every now and then, but it's generally a safe place compared to some other countries in the world. Mm-hmm. And but a lot of my students, prior to COVID, mate, they would travel, with work or for holidays and stuff. And I say to them, if you go on an overseas trip on a holiday with the mindset that you're just going for a great time, that's good. But you've got to also have the mindset that shit can happen anytime, and you need to prepare for that. So, for sure. So we think that way, mate. And quite a lot of times I'll incorporate a lot of other stuff into our training. It's not just criminal, but also the tourism side of things. And I just tap into my background all the time and share as much as I can with them, mate.
Yeah. Yeah. I also like to share stories from other people.
Definitely.
My military experience is what I had. And it was, I obviously learned a lot, but I wasn't involved in any war or anything at the time. So I have to draw from my instructors' stories and people like your stories. So to reinforce things often, speaking of the scanning you were talking about, I often use this story. It's an anecdotal. One of my old, ex-girlfriends was telling me about how her dad's friend was learning to drive, and he, a shoulder check where you look over your shoulder before you change the lanes. And she had asked him, do you know what you're doing? Because she could see he might not have been the best driver. And he's like, yeah, you look left, look right, and then you go. She's like, but what are you doing? He's like, I don't know. That's what the driving school told me. Just look left, look right. So he's not actually doing anything.
No.
So if people don't know, hey, you can't just turn your head. You have to activate your eyes, connect it to your brain, make a decision, assess. You hear these stories completely unrelated to self-defense, and then you realize that we're all human and it's all the same at the end of the day.
100%, mate. Yeah, and it's like I said, mate. There's a big difference between moving your head from left to right to actually moving your head left to right and scanning and picking up things too. And that's what I see quite often in the Krav Maga world, and I guess in the martial arts world in general, mate. People do they're getting trained to turn their head left and right, but what are they actually picking up? What are they actually picking up when they turn their head left and right? And I guess again, look, I always say, mate, that I'm very blessed that I've had the journey in my life that I have, and I'm very humble with my journey too, but it's all come to a point where, all my experiences, all my skills, everything I've done in my life is kind of come to this point now where I love teaching, because I can impart knowledge, I can impart, all this stuff that I've got to people, and I can see their development, how they're empowered, how their confidence levels, and just the way they are as human beings. It's so nice to see. But like you said about sharing other people's experiences, I also tap into my students. I've got serving police officers, I've got some military guys, I've got some contractors, I've got nurses, I've got I had an 747 pilot. Like anybody at all that trains with me, I will tap into them and I'll ask them, okay, about this, or they might share their stories and stuff. Even last night, at our class last night, I've got one of my students who's been with me for about 10 years. He was a student before he joined the police. He's been a student since he's been in the police. And I quite often when I'll teach, I'll say, look, mate, do you want to share anything? Do you want to add anything? Or I'll get him to talk about some of the things that he's encountered, because I don't want my students just to think, it's all about Paul Johnson. It's about Paul Johnson. It's not just about me. I say to them, this is not about me. This is about you guys. And I will get other people to share their experience and their knowledge and stuff like that. And I think holistically, as a team, that's really beneficial, mate. And it lets everybody be empowered. It lets everybody grow and learn from each other.
Well, that's actually very good, because I've been a bunch of different seminars with different people, and I always the instructors that have more time of them talking than having the students drilling. It's this is about you more, I think, because how do you know you've taught them anything? Because if 50% or more is them just demonstrating, other than maybe an introduction, like here's where I'm coming from, all this stuff.
Definitely.
I've seen that a lot. And then versus regardless of the organization, other ones who, they talk and then they have you do, and then they talk and then it's like 70+% of the students doing, right? Because it's developing their skills. So I think that's extremely important. It's not about the instructor.
No, 100%, mate. And like, there's a time and a place. Sometimes, as you said, some people, mate, they just want to sit there and talk about themselves and how good they are or how good they think they are and stuff. For me, it's about teaching and getting the students to start training. I will tap into my background when I need to emphasize a point or to share an experience and say to them, this is why we're doing this. And just for example, mate, last night we were doing stick work, but they're actually laying on the ground. They're doing it from the ground, and they're getting up off the ground using sticks instead of just being up on their feet. And I said to them, I said, this comes from an experience that I had when I was with the police. I was up in the Solomon Islands. I was involved in a mob attack. We were basically outnumbered. We got knocked to the ground. As I was getting up off the ground, I've got to use my baton from the actual ground, not from a kneeling position, but actually as I'm pulling myself up off the ground, I'm actually swinging, towards legs and knees and stuff like that. So everything whenever I teach something, I'll say to them, the reason we're actually doing this is for this particular reason. And then I'll separate and say, okay, this is from a police perspective or military perspective, but this is for Joe Citizen, and then I'll tap into it and say, right, this is a scenario you could find yourself in where you may have to do that. Because most people, when they do stick work, it's all standing up.
Yeah.
So we again, mate, everything that we train in, I do it from a standing, a kneeling, a sitting, and a ground. And when I talk about ground, I'm not talking about grappling. I'm talking about from the ground.
Yeah.
So that's how I, again, when I talk to my students, if I'm talking, I'll actually just mention, right, this is why we're doing it. This is an example. And then we just train, mate. And I think that's the thing I liked about Nir when we did the instructor program for Nir, mate. He gave a brief introduction about himself. And then what was the rest of the instructor's course, mate, was just training.
Yeah, drilling, a lot of drilling.
Drilling. Yeah, it was absolutely brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that. Like, I've been in, like, if you actually have an instructor running it similar to the level of like Israel, I'll find in North America at least. I don't know what it's like over there, but people are like, oh my God, like, this is hard. Like, example, I've been to a few and I see, like, for me, it's like once I make that mental shift, yeah, it's just like being in the army, no problem. And then I just see everyone else is struggling, trying to keep up with the intensity and just, 4 to 8 hours nonstop training, just go. Right. And to me, if a school isn't preparing you for that already, it's like, I don't know if you're doing a good enough job.
Yeah.
In that quite a bit, where the students are just, they mentally can't handle it. Right.
And I think that's the part you said, mentally. You can be extremely fit. You can be fit as, but if you don't have the mental capacity, if you don't have the mental, the mindset, mate, you're gonna finish up real quick.
For sure. Now, I do want to talk about your ninja background because it's a very obscure thing nowadays for someone to be at such a high level in a martial art that's, I would say, is almost extinct in many ways.
Oh, look, yeah, it's no problems at all, mate. I started in the Bujinkan, and that's probably the most recognized ninjitsu, so to speak, organization in the world. It's not actually. I started in 1989. It was actually my birthday. Actually, I started my first class on my birthday in December 1989. And back in those days, mate, you had to actually write to the teacher, to your sensei, and actually ask permission to come and train. So I was living in Northern Australia. I was up there with the military at the time, and I was getting a posting down to Sydney, and a transfer down to Sydney. And I wrote to this gentleman many times. Back then we didn't have the internet. We didn't have, so I wrote to him, and after about, 8 months, I received a letter saying that I was invited to attend his dojo, and that's basically where I started, mate. So I started training in the Bujinkan back in December '89, and so I just I was in Japan in November last year. I took a group of my students to Japan, and we celebrated my 30th year of involvement in the Bujinkan. So,
nice. Well, congratulations.
Yeah, mate. Yeah. Thanks, mate. Yeah.
No, I'm sure there's lots of, just like Krav, lots of misconceptions about what it is you guys do. Like, are you guys doing sword play or like smoke bomb stuff? Like, what are you learning?
Look, mate, it's quite interesting because the whole ninjitsu thing, obviously that's stemmed from the movies and from the media and stuff like that. But look, in the Bujinkan, there's 9 schools in the organisation that I'm in, and that's run by our Grandmaster Masaki Hatsumi, and there's nine schools, and 3 of those are traditional ninja or ninjitsu skills. The other 6 are samurai jiu-jitsu type skills. Yeah. So I always say to people, think of this, you're actually learning 9 different martial arts under the one organisation. So the journey takes you forever, mate. It's a long journey. Yeah. In relation to your question, mate, we do training in a lot of different weapon systems. We, everything from from a tanto, from a knife, to sword, to pole work, to naginata, to chain, to rope, mate. There's probably about, I actually was asked this recently, and I would say that in my time in the Bujinkan, I've probably trained in about 23, 24 different weapons. Mm-hmm. But then in taking that back, out of that, say 23, 24, what I've done is tried to become proficient in about a dozen of those. Mm-hmm. The others I know and I can teach, but as far as proficiency goes, about 10 to 12 that I've actually tried to become very proficient at.
Well, I mean, that's still pretty good. Usually people are good at 1 or none or something, Yeah. It's and look, mate, the ninjitsu side of things, or the Bujinkan side of things, there's a really great crossover between that and the Krav. So I would say 80% of my students do both, and they really enjoy the overlap. There's so much overlap between them both, and there's a lot of, especially, I guess, the footwork, and that's the big thing that a lot of my students from Krav tell me that do ninjitsu, is their footwork is so much smoother. Mm. They can move very, very well because of their ninjitsu training. But mate, it all comes down to one thing. Like I say to everybody, it all comes down to the instructor. Mm-hmm. Because you can have 10 different people that have spent 30 years in the Bujinkan. They've been to Japan many times, but it all comes down to the way they interpret it, the way they teach it, their own background, their experiences. And I go back to a conversation I had with my grandmaster several years ago, and he said to me, Paul, keep training your students for your environment. Mm-hmm. And he knows my environment, what my environment is. And he said, so keep training your students for your environment. So hence, I teach ninjitsu very similar to the way I teach Krav, in relation to making sure my students are physically prepared, mentally prepared, tactically prepared, and having the medical training behind them. So, and also fighting off them kangaroos, right?
Mate, and fighting off kangaroos, and if need be, mate. Yeah, but look, it's been a there's a lot of elements of ninjitsu that there's a misconception, as you said. In 30 years, mate, I've never worn a mask. Mm-hmm. Okay, I've never thrown a smoke bomb, but there's a lot of other aspects of it which is absolutely fascinating, and I've embraced it. My students embrace it, and it's been a great journey, mate. And I'm very very thankful and grateful that I've had the opportunity to take that journey in line with my Krav journey at the same time. Yeah.
Well, I would say that in the event of the apocalypse, knowing how to use a sword would be very useful.
Knowing how to use, a sword, knowing how to use a lot of other weapon systems and stuff is very, very, very useful, mate. Yeah, definitely. So, but look, it's the ninjitsu side of things, mate. It's really good, and I've thoroughly enjoyed it, mate. It's interesting kind of when you go to Japan, you train. When you go to the Hombu, and you've got people from all around the world that go there. You look at other people and you think to yourself, okay, they're a particular rank, and you kind of get yourself a position where you can gauge where you are in your own training. Not so much comparing, but gauging your own training. And I like to think that, like my ninjitsu dojo, it's called Bujinkan Jisen Dojo. So in Japanese, Jisen means like real fighting, real war. Yeah. So Jisen to me is about the whole concept of what I teach my students is we're training for the real world here. These skills and this knowledge that you have, it's designed for real world. And whilst our art might be 900,000 years old, and whilst a lot of the techniques are very old techniques, I teach the traditional technique, and then what we do is then we embrace that, and then we actually incorporate that into a modern application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like obviously I don't do ninjitsu, but I've been doing Brazilian jiu-jitsu for 8 years now, and I find, not obviously all props to the Gracies, but like when I see them teaching their self-defense systems, I have to refrain a little bit, because I want to say something. Would never disrespect that family, but it's just like, it's not, in many ways, it's not real anymore. Their self-defense application, and so if I'm teaching grappling for Krav, I'm like, hey, don't forget you can get kicked in the face, and you can grab and bite and all that stuff, and I try to limit the ground stuff in my Krav application. Just get them good enough to be able to defend, so that they can get face and get up. Because otherwise, you're not really doing good self-defense if you're staying on the ground for unless you're arresting someone, of course.
Of course, mate. Yeah. Look, mate. There's we could talk for a long time in relation to the ninjitsu side of things, but look, it's there's a really good crossover, and a crossover from what we do in ninjitsu to what we do in Krav, and both cross over each other, and there's a benefit for each. And I think the feedback from my students is they feel that it both complement each other, and it allows them to really open their mind up with a lot of their training and their skills and their knowledge. So, and the thing is, unfortunately, in the Bujinkan world, mate, there are so many bullshit instructors out there. Mm. And when I talk about bullshit instructors, I'm talking about they're teaching techniques, mate, which, like you said before with the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, they're teaching stuff that's just not going to work. And they think it's going to work because they have this cult mentality. Yeah. And I won't go as far as saying that the Bujinkan's a cult, because I don't believe it is. But there are people in that organisation, like other martial arts organisations, where they think that, everything revolves around that. As I said, mate, I'm very not open or vocal, but I won't hold back from my opinions anymore with the Bujinkan, because after 30 years, I'm now at the highest rank I could possibly obtain in the Bujinkan. Mm-hmm. There are people in the Bujinkan world that don't particularly like me, and they've never met me. Mm-hmm. And that's because purely, professional jealousy, the way we train our students, the way my mindset is to training. And I think it's also their own insecurities, mate, because if they really open themselves up and look at themselves in the mirror, they'll realize that a lot of what they're teaching is not going to work, mate.
Yeah, I mean, it's that humbling. Like, I take myself an example. I'm not an athlete. I'm 5'6", 160 pounds. If a big enough person wants to get in my face, I have no delusions about the difficulty it's going to be to
definitely
defend myself, and communicating that to people. that, it doesn't matter how long I've been training. There's physics. There's, like in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, I get these young guys come in, white belts, blue belts, and I never underestimate anyone because some of them, like, I had a guy once who did 10 years of Sambo, but was a white belt in Jiu-Jitsu, and I just felt it, and I'm like, and or even just a young 20-year-old who's super fit and did a bit of wrestling, and all of a sudden, me not being like, I'm not a world champion or anything, and it's like, oh, I gotta really try here, and it humbles you when you realize that physicality matters and the rule set matters, and
100%, my friend. 100%, my friend. And mate, actually tomorrow, believe it or not, I'm actually going to I'm going to talk to a group of veterans who are involved in a BJJ grappling group, and I'll actually start my very first class tomorrow in BJJ.
Nice.
And mate, I'm more than happy to put a white belt on and just be a student and just go there, mate. And so they've asked me to come and actually talk about my journey in the martial arts and what I've done through my military and my police career and that. But at the same time, after I do that, I'll then put a white belt on, mate, jump on the mats with them and just be a white belt. And I'm more than happy to do that, mate. I'm more than happy to do that.
And
so where some people, have fun. And where some people have said to me, but you've got 6 black belts and you've got this and you're an instructor with this. And I say to them, but at the end of the day, that's nice to have, but it doesn't make you who you are.
Mm.
The rank doesn't make you who you are. Your mind and your heart makes you who you are, mate. And that's where I think there's so many problems in the martial arts community, the Krav Maga world, the Bujinkan world, where people hide behind their rank. People, they think because they're at a particular rank that they've got this force field around it, mate. They've got this kind of what I call a chi blast, where they get attacked in the street, they're going to be able to stop that threat because they've got a rank.
Well, a lot more as they say, there's black belts and then there's black belts. And for me, one of my eye-opening is in Jiu-Jitsu, I did some seminars with like multi-time world champions.
Yeah.
And you just feel these people. And I'm like, man, if they get a hold of you, you're done. Like, if you have no concept of grappling, even if you've been doing Krav for 15 years, if they can get near you, you're in trouble. And it just was this eye-opening thing about like, oh, if someone has this skill level, you need to recognize it quickly that I can't stay here. I got to get out. Well, as a lot of people will try to, I know Krav Maga. I can just guide, stick a finger in their eye. And I'm like, I don't think so. Not with those people. As soon as you go near their face, they're going to be pissed and you're going to get hit. So
100%, mate. Yeah.
Recognizing
it's true.
Better is important.
You've got to, mate. And in the Bujinkan, one of our schools that we train in, mate, there's a lot of grappling. There's a lot of groundwork and grappling stuff, and I've been fortunate with that. But many years ago, one of my students, mate, he travelled with work and he went down south. It was actually Melbourne, and he went to a BJJ school there and asked if he can do some classes while he was down there. And somebody got him into a choke on the ground and stuff, and he just automatically, mate, it was just reaction from his trainer. He turned and started biting on the side of the guy's jaw. And then all of a sudden the bloke let go, and then the instructor come running over and said, mate, you're an idiot. What are you doing up there? But when he explained to him, hey, I'm sorry, this is just instinctive for me because I've been trained to do this through my training. Mm. So they basically said to him, oh, your instructor's a maniac. Okay, and that's called me a maniac. But I said to my student afterwards, did he let go? He said, yeah, he let go. I said, because he wasn't prepared for that. Yeah. Because you've got to separate the competitive side of things, the sport side of things, to the reality side of things. And you can cross them over. You can have that crossover as long as your mindset is that, well, you know the difference between reality and you know the difference between competitive.
Yeah, if I had an example like that, I have, as I said, I'm not a big guy. Some of my students are way bigger, way stronger, way faster than me. And we were working on grappling, and this individual got me in a position where it had locked my neck in a position that I couldn't turn my body, right? It's good. He learned something. And he's way stronger. No way I'm getting out of this under the normal rules. So I just grabbed his ear because that's all I could get and just pulled hard. And he let go.
Yeah.
Just like, I'm like, hey, if you want to play that game, this is a Krav class today, so I'm going to play that game.
100%, mate, 100%.
Stuff like that, you kind of know how to do it sometimes.
You've got to, mate. And you've got to also, see, for me too, mate, you've got to also always open your mind to anything. And you know, I've been fortunate, mate, over the years. Like, you know, I did a seminar with Steven Seagal a couple of years ago here in Australia. And people say, you know, Steven Seagal, this thing. But unless you actually meet the guy and see what he can do, there's a lot of misconceptions with him. I did a seminar with Anderson Silva, George St. Pierce, you know, all these people like Dan Asano. I've had that in my journey, mate. I've had that opportunity where I've gone to meet these people. I've gone to train with these people. Even if I can learn one thing from these people, that will help me. Subsequently, it's going to help my students. It might make me think differently about a particular thing, and every person I've had the opportunity to train with it's been rewarding, and it's something that I'm grateful for, because it's continually allowing me to keep my mind training, keep my skills going, because unfortunately there's too many people out there, mate, called master.
Yeah.
Master this, master that, master that. And I've got colleagues of mine that are called master, and I give them full respect, but I don't understand that concept where I'm 53 years of age this year. I've been training since I was 11. I'm not a master. Yep, I've got a number of black belts and instructor accreditation in various different organizations, and I'm grateful for that. But I'm still a student at the end of the day. I'm still continually trying to learn as much as I can, right to the very last minute where I take my breath, mate. I want to still be learning. I don't want to get to that point where I stop and say, well, hey, you know what? I'm Master Paul. No, I'm not master at nothing. And I want to continue being a student, continue evolving, and keep learning. If I can learn something from you, mate, you learn something from me, that's a bonus for both of us. If I can go and do a seminar with somebody, you know, like, as I said, like Anderson Silva, for example, I went and did a seminar. I was only there for 6 hours with him, whatever it was. But I walked away with a half a dozen new things. George St. Pierce, listen to him. Arnie Schwarzenegger, mate, I was fortunate to meet him several years ago. And just by hearing him talk, that empowered me. It gave me a different approach to things. So I always believe, mate, every person you meet, every student you meet, I learn from my students just as much as they learn from me too.
Yeah. Well, it's like, on the topic of master, like one thing, and for the most part, of course, there's a few guys in the Krav Maga world that are going around calling themselves masters. In general, my name's John. Like, I get students who come from traditional backgrounds, and I'm like, they're like, what do I call you? Sensei, master? I'm like, no, just John. It's fine, John.
John. Yeah,
I'm just the person who's teaching you some stuff. Like, I'm not special.
That's it. Yeah. And I'm the same, mate.
Yeah, even if I go to learn from Krav Maga organizations that I'm not the biggest fans of, I'm looking at it from an instructor perspective, because maybe I don't like their techniques, but maybe they did a teaching methodology that I really liked. And
Definitely.
I'll pick something like that up and adapt and modify accordingly.
Definitely, mate. Yeah, and that's the way you've got to think of it too, mate, because like myself, I'm the same. Just call me Paul.
Yeah,
you know, that's it. It's just call me Paul. When it comes to the ninjitsu side of things, from the moment we're actually on the mats or training, my students call me Sensei. No problems at all. But the moment we walk off the mat, they call me Paul, and I say to them, "Do not call me Sensei after class.
Yeah,
I'm just Paul." You know, that's where it comes down to. And they do that more from a traditional.
It makes sense if like that's the organization's way, that's the way it is, you know. It's just like let it go to your head. That's what matters, I think, right?
Yeah, exactly, mate. Like my rank in the Bujinkan is Daishihan, so it's like the highest rank I can get. I've said to my students, don't you ever call me Daishihan. Never call me that. Never call me Shihan. Just call me Sensei. That's it. That's all, you know. And with my Krav, just call me Paul.
Yeah.
You know, even after class, do not call me Sensei, just call me Paul, because that's all I am, mate. But as I said, I've seen a number of times, I've been to seminars and they say, oh, you know, master such and such much. And I think to myself, you know, master of bullshit, that's pretty much all you are. It's kind of like, you know, it really is, because if you start believing in your own BS, that's when you fail, mate. That's when you become complacent then.
Yeah.
You become complacent. And you can't, I don't want to walk around saying, hi, my name's Master Paul. To me, that's just ego as far as I'm concerned, mate.
Yeah.
We're
on the same page, I think. Now, your shift a little bit. Now, you have a police background and you're on the other side of the world. So I'm curious as to what you and maybe those in Australia are thinking of what's going on with policing in North America right now. Because one thing I always remind even my students is like, hey, what we hear on the news here, if I go to England, it's going to be saying a different thing. If I go to Australia, it's going to be saying a different thing. If I go to Russia, it's going to be saying a different thing. So I'm actually curious to hear, with your background as well as being somewhere else, like what your thoughts are.
No worries, mate. Just so, first of all, just understand. So I served for a decade with the Australian Federal Police. Mm-hmm. Now, our AFP, there's a lot of similarities between your Mounties. There's a lot of similarities between the FBI. We encompass a lot of different things that a lot of these major organisations around the world have, and we do it all in the one organisation. Mm-hmm. So in my time, mate, as a federal agent, I was also a firearms and defensive tactics instructor at the same time. Mate, I've also had the privilege to train about 15, 16 different police organisations around the world, and obviously be on operations with it. So that's kind of a little bit of my background. Now, in relation to the US and North America, to me, it's very sad, mate. Very, very sad to see. And when you start thinking about, closing down police departments, that's just, to me, I can't even understand that concept. It's just outrageous, mate. And the way that the people have reacted to the police, look, and without getting into the politics side of things, mate, there are good police, there are bad police. There's good, bad everywhere in the world. In the heat of the moment, that's the big thing for me. When shit hits the fan, in the heat of the moment, and you make a decision, you're going to be judged on that forever. Mm-hmm. And if it goes bad. So I think a lot of those things that have happened over in the US, some of those have been justified. Some of them have been excessive use of force, most definitely. Mm-hmm. But mate, the way I've seen the public react against the police, it's just disgusting. They should be, ashamed of themselves.
And, I'm quite the political guy, I think, as an amateur, I would say. So I do keep track of this stuff. And you notice that the crime rates and shooting rates are spiking.
Yes.
In Chicago the other day, they had to pull up, like Batman style, pull up the drawbridges to stop looters from coming in. Seattle police chief, who was a black woman, stepped down after they defund the police. She just basically said, I can't do this anymore. Like, you guys.
Yeah, that's right.
And you're getting people leaving, it's hard to avoid the politics in American stuff. A lot of people are just leaving the democratic states that are basically doing this and going to states that aren't acting so silly about it.
Yeah, no. It is, mate. Like, even from here in Australia, I'm watching, I'm studying, I'm talking to people over there and watching what's going on, actively observing what's going on. And to me, it's just, I can't comprehend in any way, shape or form why they're allowing this to happen. It's just ludicrous. And I guess for me, I remember a couple of months ago, mate, there was a video that was doing the rounds of a police chief in one of the small areas there, and he basically said, in our county we have guns. The people have guns. I encourage them to have guns. So if you want to come into their house, well, you can expect them to shoot you and stuff. This is the police chief. Yeah. And I'm thinking to myself, mate, you got balls. Like, seriously, that's what we expect from. Basically saying, if you're a piece of shit and you want to break into somebody's house and rob them, well, you can expect the consequences. And you see this massive shift, mate. This mind shift where from that to the fact that you got other people wanting to defund the police. It's just And as you said, mate.
On that, like, it's coming from Canada, like, I'm licensed to teach our firearm safety course here. And, the topic of firearms and self-defense comes up, obviously. And the quick answer in that course is always, no, you cannot. Yeah. The real answer is kind of, you can. But you're going to be dealing with the nightmare of the courts and the police and all this sort of
Definitely.
stuff. There are,
Definitely.
I say, if you end up for whatever reason using a firearm in self-defense, it's a coin flip a lot of the time, whether you are going to go to jail or whether you are going to get off on self-defense. And you really don't know, because if I go ask the average Canadian, like, hey, if someone forcibly breaks into your house and you have a gun, can I shoot them? They're going to say, yeah. Most Canadians who don't know I mean, it's the same in every country. Nobody knows what the hell their own laws are, but they'll say, yeah, you can, which to me is like, we're in a common law country except for Quebec. That should be the law, but that's not really the law here, right? The law is usually equal force, which is a very gray area a lot of the time. To me, if they use force to enter my house, I have no idea what their intentions are. And they could just as easily grab a knife as they would to run out the door. But as you said, they're a piece of shit. They shouldn't be doing that in the first place. And it should be obvious not to do that. But like, I have to tell people, listen, like, while there is grounds for using firearms in self-defense, like you can't, there is an open and concealed carry license here, but you are never going to get it ever.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So you can't actually walk around like in the States, but you can have firearms here. You can have pistols, rifles, and, you know, people want to know. A lot of people, I just tell people like, hey, it's better to have them because you never know. But if you do use them, you might go to jail. So you have to be very, very careful when using them. I just joke about, hey, but if you have them and the zombie apocalypse comes, you're good to go, right? So
yeah. As long as you can justify it, mate, that's at the bottom line.
Yeah. And like, because I know Australia's got some pretty strict firearms laws too. I'm not that up to what they are. Like, how are firearms viewed there?
Look, I guess here, mate, Australia looks at the American system, you know, especially like Texas, you know, where, you know, you can carry firearms and stuff like that. Here, prior to Port Arthur, the Port Arthur massacre, mate, back in the mid-90s, there was a, you know, people carried firearms here. You know, obviously not, they didn't carry it on themselves, but firearms were prevalent. You could go and buy a firearm. You go shooting. You could go hunting, recreational, sports shooting, that type of thing. You could carry. You could actually own them. And even back in those days, mate, it was, you know, you could go to a gun shop and buy a Spaz 12. You could go and buy, you know, like you can buy all sorts of different types of, you know, semi-automatic weapons and some military type ones and, you know, sporting ones. But after Port Arthur, mate, our government basically shut that right down, and over a long period of time, it's started to really, it's very restrictive now, mate. You know, you can still go and become a member of a sports shooting organisation. You go through your safety license, you go through all the licensing, and you can still have a firearm, and you can still go out and be you know, part of a shooting club. You can still go out and do, you know, for feral animals and stuff like that. But it's a lot more restricted now, mate. And we really, in our society here, you could say it's a no gun policy or no gun society. But the biggest problem is, mate, all the shit bags out there, all the scum out there, mate, they're the ones carrying the firearms, you know. And there's always shootings that happen and stuff like that. So, you know, from a police perspective, mate, I think it's been counterproductive in many cases. I think what they did, that was probably at that time, Australia had never had such a huge massacre in that scale. And the Prime Minister at the time, who actually fortunately had the opportunity to work with, mate, and protect, he made a decision at the time, I think, in the best interest of our country, and but I think it's a bit of a knee-jerk reaction at the time too. I think they could have done a lot differently.
Yeah, well, it's like, I don't know, do you follow in Canadian politics at all? Nobody usually is, but I might as well ask.
No, mate, I still tap into it, mate. I'm very international with my mind. You know, I look at everybody, you know, what's happening in the world. So, and I know that he's, you know, your Prime Minister's not, you know, probably not the most
I'll save my rant about him. But like, I'm sure you heard about the Nova Scotia shooting, right?
Yes, I did, mate. Yeah.
So this is like crazy. It turns out that guy might have been an RCMP informant, and they knew about him. And we do have red flag laws here. You know, the things they're resisting in the States. Whereas if you think someone's nuts, you can call them in, and they take their guns away.
Yeah.
And this guy had been reported forever. And the RCMP should have taken all his stuff away. And it turns out it's going to be hitting the courts probably. He may have been an informant against a crime organization. And that's why he was continued to allow to be the psycho that everyone knew he was. And then our government is using that as a reason to take more gun rights away now. They're trying to ban a whole bunch of things. And it's turning into a nightmare for them because it turns out it might have not been so legal the way they're doing it. But it just shows you, it's like, as you said, it might have been counterproductive because, like, as a use of force expert, it's like, you know, that it's predators. If predators think it's going to get hurt doing something it's doing, it's not going to do it. That's why a lion takes out the weak, right? So if criminals think there's severe risk and consequences such as firearms, you're going to be less likely. And you're seeing our government now is blaming just gun ownership for crime, gang crime, particularly in Toronto. But when you actually follow the statistics and the numbers, it's coming in. Most of the firearms are coming in illegally through the state into Canada. They know this. It's publicly available records. And yet it's this we're going to make everyone safer by taking away your firearms. And it's like, but we don't really have a problem in Canada, except for the fact in this case, in the Nova Scotia case, the RCMP didn't do their job. In that they knew that he was a psycho.
yeah. And that's, as you said, mate, that might have been the reason why he was allowed to continue.
Yeah, probably. It's all still open, but it's pretty damning evidence that is publicly available already. Not to mention the million other damn scandals going on with this current government, but I won't bore with that shenanigans.
Well, actually, mate, after that shooting, there was a documentary here and it talked about gun ownership in Canada as opposed to America. Yeah. And I was actually shocked, mate. I knew that, there's a lot of guns in Canada, but they did a comparison between gun ownership in Canada and the US and the number of shootings in the US compared to Canada. Mm-hmm. And mate, there was, obviously this marked difference between the number of shootings and in particular, like active shooter situations and stuff like that. And I was surprised, mate, of the number of guns in Canada and the ownership of firearms in Canada.
It's quite high. I mean, you have to remember, this country was founded on basically fur trapping and conquering the wilderness, per se.
100%, mate.
So it's part of our history. And because we have, like similar to Australia in the sense that we have a few cities and a giant piece of land. And the conversation is often dictated by those 5 cities, but the other half of the population lives in rural Canada. And I would rather walk around with a pistol for animal self-defense personally, because it's quicker, it's easy to maneuver. I'm not allowed to anymore. You basically can't. There are a few exceptions, but you needs to be job related. Like if you're an actual fur trapper, they might allow you to. Yeah. But you basically have to walk around with because the way they classify firearms here is non-restricted, restricted, or prohibited, right? So non-restricted being your like hunting firearms, and a lot of, ironically enough, the Tavor, the Israeli, is a non-restricted here. Yet the AR, up until recently, was a restricted being handguns and anything they designated as restricted. And those can only be taken to a range, a gunsmith, or anywhere legally allowed to. While as non-restricted can be taken anywhere. And then prohibited is like machine guns and stuff like that, which you basically have to have a prohibited license to have. And you're good luck getting that as the average person. There are reasons, if you're a collector or armorer in the movies, you can get it usually. So they've to me, a lot of the ways it's arbitrary though. Like I was a machine gunner, sniper, like a machine, like to me, the whole thing about fully automatic firearms is like, who wants to spend the money on that? And I think a trained hunter, even with a bolt action rifle, could probably take more people out quicker than someone with a machine gun in most cases. So,
100%,
it's this, the misinformation about these things, right? And we, as you mentioned, as Australia, you're hearing, firearms ownership in Canada. I never would have thought. And it really shows that there's something wrong with what's going on in America. Like, why? Maybe it's the lack of mental health support.
Yeah.
Right. We have I wouldn't call it the best in the world by any means, but there's a lot of support networks here for people to get the help they need. And it's very
definitely
rare to see that kind of thing. And, we have safe storage laws, where you have to store your firearms in the house properly, with either a trigger lock or in a gun cabinet or safe, especially if there's children.
Definitely.
And
same as Australia.
Yeah. And that had dramatically reduced accidental discharge causing death crazily. And what a lot of people don't know is when I say to people, what's the number one cause of death regarding firearms in Canada? What do you think it is?
Who, me?
Yeah. What's your guess? If you were to guess, what's the number one reason someone dies due to a firearm in Canada?
Probably safety, mate. Probably the accidental, mate. It's not because somebody's pointing at them. Probably suicide.
Suicide. Yep. It's 80%. Something like that. And that number has been pretty consistent. Now, since they introduced the safe storage laws, it's reduced a bit because it gives people a time to think, right, before they act. Because it's a very spur of the moment thing. But people always will say, oh, crime. It's like, well, actually, no. I don't have the stats right in front of me. Off the top of my head, I think it's 15% will be classified. It's like 80-something%, give or take, a suicide. 15 is like what they call a misuse of a firearm. And then 5% is something else I can't remember right now. But that 15%, the misuse of firearms, is where the crime happens. All that. But what they don't tell you is that 15%, a lot of those are paperwork crimes, or an accidental discharge resulting in the loss of a license. So it's actually a very small percentage of firearms-related crimes in Canada, and almost all of it is towards organized crime and using illegal firearms. Now, I even saw the media pad the stat once. They took airsoft accidents and included it in the stat once. This isn't the RCMP stats. This is what a media did one time to pad the stats about how dangerous around children is. And then you read it and you're like, dude, it's airsoft. Like, what are you talking about? So for me, it's especially with firearms, like, again, I don't know what's going on in the States with that, because I'm no problem if you are a trained individual having a carry license personally.
I agree. Yeah, right? I agree, mate. Yeah.
But just the misinformation, the fact that people don't even know their own laws is where things can go sideways. And you can see, to me, I just look at history, and if someone wants to confiscate, is so adamant about confiscating firearms or an easy means for people to defend themselves, I'm going to question the shit out of that person. Right? Because I think that they have more nefarious long-term plans if they don't want the average citizen to be able to reasonably defend themselves, Yeah,
100%, mate. Yeah. And it's interesting talking to you, mate, about that, because you look at, Canada, the US, Australia, for example, and like here in Australia, mate, as I said, any country in the world, when they want to ban firearms, they always use Australia as a case, study. They always do. And there's merit in that, but there's also, they've got to also look at the big picture too. Mate, a few years ago, what was it, 2017, I was in the US, and I was in Las Vegas, and we were lined up at a Walmart. What was it, the Black Friday? What's it called? The Black Friday sales?
Stay away from anything in the States.
Yeah. We were lined up, mate, and we're in this big line. And as it kind of went around, I was just, looking around, taking it all in. And all of a sudden, a guy lifted his jumper up, and he had a firearm. He had a pistol. And straight away, he went to adjust his holster. So for me, thinking this guy's going for a draw, and I was just about to, go hands on. Yeah. And then quickly I realized I'm in the US. They have concealed carry. This guy's, it's not just slung in his back pocket or something. It's in an actual holster. And he was just readjusting his holster. So just at the last minute, I stopped myself from going hands on and calling out gun, and then realized where I was. And so for the first couple of days, mate, there, you have to even the people I'm staying with, the family I'm staying with, he carries a firearm. He's got one in the car and stuff like that. And you just got to get your head around that, because when you come from a society where you don't see that, and the only people carrying firearms, if they're not law enforcement, they're criminals. So, as I said, we do have a large population of people that do have firearms here, sporting shooters or recreational shooters, a rural, as you said before, John, it's, in Australia, we've got a massive land here, and there's a large percentage of that is rural. And when they've taken the ability away from the farmers and that to be able to use firearms because they've restricted the type of classification of firearms, it's made it very, very difficult for a lot of people. But on the other side of the coin, mate, I recall, many years ago, being offered a Sten, a World War II Sten machine gun, 9mm Sten machine gun, and 300 rounds of ammo for $250 US.
Yeah.
In the back of a car. And, and even when I was working as a police officer, mate, I remember a raid I went on in Sydney, and we found an AK-47. With an organised crime gang. And so here in Australia, there's a lot of firearms out there. There's a lot of firearms on the black market. And they're all imported from overseas or bought in overseas. And even in the last couple of years with these 3D printers, there's organisations here now, mate, that are actively making firearms through 3D printers.
Yeah.
And doing good work with it too. So I think no matter where you are in the world, mate, if you want a firearm, if you're really intent on having a firearm, you got the right means, the right amount of money, you can pretty much pick up anything. Of course.
Like even in high school, I was a pretty good kid, more or less. We all make decisions and stuff, but I knew people in high school kids who could get me an illegal handgun.
That's what I mean. Yeah.
Just give them the money and they'll get it for you. And so, if someone, as I'm sure if someone really wants to do something, they're going to do it. Or you mentioned the AK-47, they're prohibited in Canada, so you can't have them.
Yeah.
I've seen people in the bush with them, just shooting.
Yeah.
So either, which you're not allowed to do. If it's restricted or prohibited, you can't take it out in the middle of nowhere. We are fortunate, though, on what would be considered Crown land, which is most of Canada. You can shoot non-restricted as long as there's no bylaws in that area or something.
Okay.
Contrary. Yeah. So, it's very common. People go off, like I'm in British Columbia, you just go off on the logging roads, find a clearing with your non-restricted rifles, and you just go shooting, and it doesn't bother anyone. What I would say is, one time I was doing that, all legal, of course. A forestry individual came up to me and was... we obviously have guns with us, and he's got a gun. Doesn't think anything of it. He's just there to tell us, like, hey, can you please pick it up? Because someone's accidentally set a fire last week doing this. And we're like, no problem. But I know for a fact the city police, who have this different mentality, are going to react very differently, assuming you're legally doing what you're supposed to be doing. Because legally, technically, I do not advise this to anyone who's listening to me. If I have a non-restricted firearm that's unloaded, hypothetically, I can walk down the street with it in, say, Vancouver. Now, what's going to happen if you do that? You're going to get arrested. You'll get charged with other disturbance of the peace. But if I do the same thing in rural Canada, they'll probably just be like, Bob, what the hell are you doing? So there's a very the big contrast between rural Canada and the cities, but the cities are what decide all the power, and it now here, usually the native communities are exempt from most of these laws, which is, a debate in itself, considering, unfortunately, they are responsible for a lot of the violent crime in most of Canada due to complicated issues, very complicated issues. I'm not saying black and white at all. So it's very interesting when governments decide that the political ramifications are not worth it. Oh, they can have it unrestricted, but everyone else can't. It gets very interesting as who's making the decision, why, and most people don't bother to actually look into it.
It becomes very hypocritical.
And it's it's interesting to see what will happen in Canada, because the current gun grab is so problematic for both legal reasons and practical reasons. It's going to be quite the shit show here for the next little while.
I can imagine.
On that
I can imagine, mate. I can imagine, mate. Yeah.
But as you said, as someone from another country, you don't even think Canada, the peaceful guys in igloo who like hockey, you know?
I always knew you guys had guns there. It was just the fact that this documentary was so well done that the comparison between firearms there and the US, and then the number of actual active shooter situations in the US compared to Canada, and the number of actual, shootings itself. It was and that gets you thinking, because even Australia, prior to the Port Arthur massacre, there was a lot of guns, a lot of people shooting. We had a massive ownership of firearms here, and even back in those days, you could buy, you could buy a Chinese SKS, mate, for $50.
Oh, I wish they're about $250, $300 here.
Yeah, back then in those days, you could buy a lot of different weapons back in those days, but we didn't have the number of shootings, mate. We didn't have the level of crime that they have, in the world today. Back in those days, mate, back in those days, if you, sure, there might be a shooting every now and then, there might be a stabbing or something. But back in those days, mate, if you want to have a fight with somebody or you got problems, you go hands on, mate. You don't. Yeah. Where we've been fortunate, mate, in Australia. We've had there's been probably 3 significant mass shootings here in Australia, and most people don't even know what the other 2 are. And
great.
But you know what? We didn't have the number that obviously occur in the US. It's almost like on a weekly basis in the US somewhere there's a mass shooting.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I don't know if you follow my blog. A while ago, maybe a year. I can't remember. I did a bit of research in killing murder rates in various countries. Now, country to country, it is difficult to get accurate numbers. And when you look at homicide rates, the US per capita is actually not that high up. And he's number one country, I think, in the thing was El Salvador. And then you look at murders in Brazil, and it's 60, 70,000 a year. And you're like, what the hell? And the media attention is always on the States. Right?
Yeah, of course.
And it's not, while they definitely have problems, for sure. I think there's just a lot of corruption in the States and nonsense and misinformation. But on a global scale, maybe not right now in certain cities, but it's generally not that bad in the States. The question would be the mass shooting thing. That is a phenomenon in itself. But then again, let's take a look at the cartel wars in the States. Aren't those mass shootings, mass murders? And
that's right. Yeah,
it's a bit of a delusion, I think, to say that America is this only one that has this problem and everyone likes to shit on them.
Definitely.
But it's let's look at other countries properly.
That's it.
Find out what happened now,
And you've only got to look at places I've spent a lot of my time in China, and you've got to look at China, mate. They've had a large number of mass attacks, mate, with the use of knives.
Yep.
Where they've gone into schools and kindergartens, and they've actually, and these offenders, mate, have actually gone into there and killed a large number of children very, very quickly just with the use of a knife. These mass attacks and stuff, and people kind of overlook that, and they think, okay, yeah, it only happens in America. Well, you only got to look at other countries that have had mass shootings and stuff
too, right?
Yeah, that's it. Exactly right, mate. Yeah, exactly. If as I've said a number of times in China to the Chinese police, the only reason you don't have mass shootings over here is because people can't get the access to them as freely as they can in the US. But if they could, then you want to think to yourself that if they're gonna go into a school with a knife, well, sure enough, they'll go in there with a gun if they've got the means to obtain one.
Yeah. Well, you say that about the mass knife attacks, and I believe they happen far more than we realize. They're just not reported. And from the ones that are reported on abnormally big difference, there's more people killed in a mass stabbing attack on average than a mass shooting attack. Now, in the States, I don't know about other countries, for political reasons, I imagine, they keep lowering the number of people dead required to call it a mass shooting. It used to be a lot higher. Now it's like 4 people.
Okay.
And then you look at
Yep.
like a mass knife attack, it's like 30 people every time, 20 people every time. And you're like,
Yeah.
what the hell? I know England tried to ban knives or something, and it's just like, you guys are nuts. Like that's,
Yeah.
who is thinking of that? You're not gonna. It's not something you can get rid of, bladed object, or you can sharpen a bic to be a stabbing object, a bic
That's
lighter.
exactly, mate. Exactly, mate. Yeah, exactly.
Violence,
If you, again,
violence,
that's it, mate. That's exactly right. As you said, violence is violence, mate. And whatever they have available, they'll use it.
Yeah. And I think people don't realize that because I think the world is using the U.S. as a distraction in many ways to cover up their own shit that they.
That's it, mate.
Look
100%.
at them, what they're doing. It's kind of like I make fun of the American military. It's like you only ever hear about the Marines and the Navy SEALs now. When the hell do you hear about the rest of any of the other armed services? And I'm like, they like it like that. They distract you with the Marines. Meanwhile, these other army units are going and doing all this crazy stuff you know nothing about because no one's paying attention to them. It's the same thing. Everyone's shitting on the States. Meanwhile, we got all sorts of other problems going on in the world that are in many ways worse. But everyone's shitting on the States. So it's... global conflict is I have a feeling it's cyclical. It's going up and down towards another war. It's like something happens, the peak is there and it goes down and then it goes down and then we don't want to get too much into it, but like what's going on with China, it's like, guys, this is a repeat of history. And everyone's like, no, it's not, it's fine. Like, oh, sure. And then we'll see what happens. I have no idea. I just was reading a quote from the Filipino president. I mean, he's a little interesting character himself, but he was just saying he want to go to war with China, but he can't because they know they'll lose because they keep trying to take their land, right? So
that's it.
It's like, oh, but America's got a gun problem. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that's right. Mate, from here down the Asia Pacific region, and other parts of the world aren't aware of this, mate, because a lot, as you said, the focus is often on the US, and also many people in the US, mate, their focus is just on the US. So from my experience in the US, a lot of people don't know what's happening around the world. They're very insular in many cases. I remember even when we were doing that course in LA, I was at local Starbucks, and I was sitting there, and after the class after the course that night, and I just said to a guy, I said, "G'day, mate, how you going?" And he said to me, "Oh, where are you from?" I said, "Australia." Yeah. And he said, "Oh, it must be very cold there at the moment in Austria." He said, "It must be very cold there in Austria." Yeah. I said, "No, I'm from Australia." He goes, and he asked me where Australia was.
Yeah.
And I thought, oh my goodness, like, are you serious? Yeah. So, at the moment down here, there's major concerns with China, mate. You've got the South China Sea. And my biggest concern is, mate, that I personally believe that in the next 18 months to 2 years, there will be a heightened level of conflict between China and Australia. Yeah. Obviously, China and America. There's also conflict at the moment, obviously, with the Chinese and the Philippines, Burma, Vietnam. A lot of the countries, Japan, this whole area, this whole South China Sea, and it's a bit of a tinderbox at the moment. Yeah. And I believe what's going to happen in the next 18 months to 2 years is there will be a miscommunication, and I believe that the Chinese will try to shoot down one of our planes, maybe attack one of our boats, one of our Navy ships, or another country. And I believe that it's very much like the 1930s and the mindset of the Japanese back then, mate, the domination of this whole region.
A little while ago, I went to a talk from forgot the gentleman's name, but he was the former head of CSIS, which is like the Canadian CIA.
Yes. Yeah.
And he was basically saying, Russia, this is at the height of the Russiagate nonsense stuff. And he was like, Russia's a problem, but they're more like that annoying kid flicking you in the ear. Yeah. China is a real threat. And, and I heard it coming from his mouth. I'd kind of heard it before. I'm like, oh, and yet the narrative, at least in the States, is still Russia, 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 Russia still. Yeah. And I'm like, but the evidence doesn't support that. And I think it's just because the economies are so intertwined with China, there's a lot of hesitance to do anything because, I mean, I look at it, I compare, like, people don't want to learn history. And it's like, what China's doing right now is comparable to 1930s Hitler. And not Trump is Hitler because I don't like him. I'm like, literally, they're annexing stuff. They're, saber rattling. They're saying, what are you going to do? They're interfering with heavily with other people's governments. And I'm just like, man, does no one else see this as a problem? Yeah, Putin's a dick, but whatever. He's not really doing much more than trying to maintain Russia's glory or whatever. And they don't have the resources to do a lot of the damage that people say they do. Like financially, they're not in a position to do, but China is in full control of that. They did what I call a soft takeover of a lot of the world, and then
most definitely,
realizing, oh shit, we're about to get the rug pulled out from under us, and no one is quite sure what to do because just like in Krav Maga, if someone's being violent to you and you're unable to avoid it, you have one option. I say that about sanctions too. Sanctions will only go so far. If you don't want a country to do something, you have one choice. And of course, nobody wants this to happen because who wants to have another major war? That would be very bad. But,
definitely, yeah. Since this whole COVID period, mate, too, is the Australian government, and we're very fortunate. We've got a very, very good Prime Minister here at the moment, and he has done an amazing job through this whole period. But he came out, at the start of the COVID period and said, he basically called China out. And because of what he's done and what our government's done, China has tried a number of bullying tactics against us here. And I think what they maybe thought, I think they underestimated us. And I think what they thought we were going to, I think they thought we were going to basically fold in and just kind of and give in to them.
Yeah.
We haven't actually, and we've actually we've fought back, and in a respectful way, but we've fought back in a very, very stern way, and we've sent a stern message back to them, and we've said to them, you can stop our trade, you can do this, you can threaten us with this, but you know what? We're a sovereign country, we're a sovereign nation. We are democratic. We will stand up to you. If we believe you're doing the wrong thing, we'll stand up to you. And we certainly have, mate, over the last, in particular, the last 6 months, it's been actually quite amazing to see. And I think the CCP, mate, have actually I think they've been a little bit shocked with our reaction, the way we've actually stood up to them. And, consequently, a lot of other countries are now starting to stand up to them. And,
except one country that I'm unfortunately living in.
And there's also
major Western power due to our current government that's basically rolling over. And the Huawei thing.
That's it.
There's 3 or 4 major telecommunication companies in the country, and they're heavily involved, intertwined to a corrupt level with the governments here. But 2 of the major carriers on their own were like, we are not having anything to do with Huawei. We're not going to use their 5G technology. The government didn't do anything. The companies privately recognize this is a problem. The third big one had already started and now is kind of like, what do we do? I suspect they don't want the public to really realize that they've already been installing Chinese technology. And they're probably caught with their pants down now. But I think if the public really pays attention, they're going to jump from that carrier to the other 2 because it's safer. Not to mention the Huawei exec is being held in Vancouver, actually.
In house arrest. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, from what I've heard, it's not really a house arrest, but close enough.
Close enough, yeah. Well, and I think the biggest problem we've had over the last 15 years, mate, is because, you look at the US, Canada, Australia, all the major countries in the world, mate, we've been immersed in Iraq and Afghanistan in particular. And and our whole focus has been on, obviously, terrorism, which is completely understood. But our whole focus has been on the Middle East. Yeah. And what's happened is we've let our guard down, and slowly the CCP they've watched this, and they've actually used this, and it's been a bit of a smokescreen. And slowly what they've done is they've built up their military bases, they've taken over islands and lands, and stealing other people's sovereign country and that. And what we've been, I think, in many cases, mate, the world's been asleep, and China has slowly, bit by bit, done this. And then what's happened is at the last minute we realised, geez, we've got to be careful. And now the attention, I obviously notice with the US now, their attention has come, basically full circle. And now they obviously understand that China is a major threat to them in many, many cases. Obviously, the theft of intellectual property and even militarily. And I think they're playing catch up.
Yeah.
And I think most of the countries around the world, mate, including our own, are playing catch up now. And as I said, mate, I've spent a lot of time in China. I've been going to China since 1987, which was my first trip there, and I was there up until October last year. But I think I've done 37 trips now, and on the whole, in overall, mate, the Chinese people are are great people, and it's not so much the Chinese people, it's the CCP, because I often ask people, in China, if they're a member of the party, that's different, but there's a lot of people there that, mate, would love to see the CCP fold down and become a democratic nation, and it's not so much the Chinese people per se, it's the CCP. And obviously there's a lot of propaganda that's used effectively there. And they often talk about losing face, and which is, to me, it's a very hypocritical concept.
On a macro level, I think.
100%, mate. Yeah, but we have to be concerned about this, and even if you look at what's happening internally in China with Xinjiang, and and what's happening over there, obviously looking at Hong Kong, and there's a big picture here that's happening. And I think if the world collectively doesn't stand up to them sooner rather than later, we're gonna have a bit of a mess, mate, around the world in many situations.
Now, I don't know if you know much about the demographics of Vancouver, but it is 80% Asian, including Indians. But that means we have a large Chinese community here.
Yeah,
and it's interesting because you can see the divide. Like a while back, when at the start of the Hong Kong protests, you were actually getting brawls between mainland Chinese students here on student visas with Hong Kong students who are on Hong Kong visas, or even kids who grew up. It's just like crazy. Stuff. And the media is barely touching it because they're like, but it's, I know this is going on, and it's a complex, and even amongst themselves, it's a complex issue. And I've been in places where I get, Chinese individuals who left China and are like very vocal against the government. And then you get actually the younger generation here who's like, oh, I love China, because they don't know any better. There's a reason your parents left.
That's it. Exactly.
You add to that on the sort of a flip thing. Like, I've never been to China, but someone close to me was recently there before COVID. And, obviously they're very careful what they say when they're there, but they were asking people in sort of mid East Coast China, I guess. And, how do you think? And of course, they're like, oh, it's great. I need food. They make sure we get food. And if I need an apartment, they make sure I have an apartment. And they've done, in many ways, a masterful job with lots of their population to not have the peasant revolt anymore. What created the Communist Party in China, they're doing everything they can not to allow that to happen again, right? Keep everyone somewhat happy enough that they don't want to revolt. Because, as big as their army is, the population is bigger, right? And they know that.
That's it. Yeah.
It's a very interesting, because I know people who will deny Mao is bad here in Vancouver than I know people who were in Tiananmen Square. And they're like, it's a horrible thing, right? So it depends on where people grew up and what their belief systems are, whether or not they see them as a positive influence or a negative influence. And don't get me wrong, I love Chinese food and Chinese culture, but from the
of course, mate.
CCP, it's very problematic in many ways.
It's what you said. We've had the same problems here, mate. Even on university campuses and stuff like that. There's been a lot of problems here with pro Beijing and pro Hong Kong, and and as you said, mate, we've got a large population here. We have a large community, Chinese Australian community, and a lot of those are from mainland China. A lot of those are from Hong Kong. And you talk to people that were born in Hong Kong. You talk to people that have grown up in Hong Kong. They don't class themselves as Chinese. They class themselves as Hong Kongese, and they're brokenhearted of what's happening in China at the moment. And on the other side of the coin, you've got people that are mainland China, and they believe, still to this day, they believe that Hong Kong's part of China, Taiwan's part of China, you know, and anywhere in the world that's got Chinese people is part of China. And that's because of the propaganda machine that the CCP is, mate. You know, and we've got to be really, really careful. We've got to be really awake to what's happening, because this is gonna spread. This is gonna cause problems to the world.
And you know,
as the year goes.
Someone was telling me from pretty legitimate source, and it's pretty publicly available, that they've now developed satellite technology that can track like intercontinental ballistic missiles in real time now, right? China. And so everyone's a little bit freaking out because of that. I was just telling this person, like, yeah, it's not that impressive because Israel's had technology like that since the 80s anyways. So, but for China to have it, who's a world global aggressor, it's like, now we're going to have some problems. Right, because now they're on equal footings or getting close to equal footings militarily. Like, what do we do without a full-scale war? It's pretty not such a. And I'm not advocating that at all. I just, you just take one wrong politician or one miscommunication. Like, I don't know. The Cuban Missile Crisis, to my understanding, was actually avoided by the submarine captain, not of the Russian subcap, who just didn't shoot the missile or something.
Okay, yeah.
And again, I've heard that. So you never know what's going to set it off or save it, because it's usually something completely obscure. It's like every damn Israeli war that they won dramatically, it's because some person did something so ridiculous that no one was expecting, So
yeah.
I have no idea where that's going to go. As I tell everyone, learn martial arts and get guns just in case, if you're able to, even if you don't want to use them on a day-to-day basis. You just no, because like I listen to a lot of intellectual podcasts, I don't know if you know who Noah Yuval Harari is at all. Israeli.
No.
Yeah, he's an Israeli author. He wrote these best-selling books, but him and a lot of academics have this idea that, and I like a lot of what they're saying, but they have this idea that we're in such a state of progress, we can never go back to the way things were. Don't worry, there's never going to be a war like that again. While yes, statistically the world is better than it's ever been, you're less likely to die. You don't have to worry about dying of an infection as much. And for most of the world, a lot of diseases are going away. But what hasn't changed is humans. And it always reminds me of the Einstein quote, or give or take, I'm paraphrasing. I don't know what weapons are going to be fought with during World War III, but I know that World War IV is going to be fought with sticks and stones. And it's like, I don't understand how these hyper-intelligent, very well-read, educated individuals can think it's never going to happen again. We said that about the Holocaust, and then that happened again and again and throughout the world. And it's like, what do people think? Like, I just don't get why people don't take this stuff more seriously.
I tend to agree with you, mate. I think probably the reason people don't is because the majority of the population walk around with their head in the sand. They walk around with their head, nothing's going to happen to me. And they've got this kind of this whole mindset that, they don't see outside the box. And I think while humans are still animals, we still have that animal, instinct and that mindset that we're always going to have these problems no matter where. Because when you look at globally, mate, you only got to look at the way people think in different communities, different societies, different countries. It's that animal instinct, dog eat dog world. And it goes right back to what you said at the start about the lion, and that's what it is. It's people want domination. I think it all comes down to ego too, greed, ego, all those factors.
Bringing it back to Krav Maga, I talk about this stuff periodically in class, one, because I enjoy it, but two, I look at it as it's part of self-defense because Canadians like to travel. And
Yeah.
I'm just like, oh, you don't like politics? You think it's irrelevant? You don't like history? You don't think it's irrelevant? Like, what happens if you go somewhere that you weren't paying attention to? It's like I'll use Thailand as an example. Well, they had a military coup a few years ago.
That's it. Exactly right, mate.
Did you know that? A lot of people got stuck in the middle of this because they weren't paying attention to the warnings that, hey, political rumblings, don't go to Thailand. And they go, oh, yeah, it's no problem. Or even better, the Mexico. I'm like,
yeah.
You want to go to Mexico? Really? Are you sure? Do you know how safe it is? And they're like, it's totally fine. I'm like, are you going to go outside of the resorts? Maybe. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that, mate. They'll find your body riddled with bullets and in a burnout car or something like that, mate. You know. And,
well, on that note, I had someone I met in Israel who's Mexican. He was helping out volunteering in Israel, and he was making the joke. He's like, Mexicans are afraid of the dark, and I'm like, that's not funny. He's like, it's not meant to be funny. Don't go out at night, and don't go out at night by yourself. Like, that's what definitely. I meant.
That's it's interesting. It's interesting, mate. You're saying this because again, just from my experience in talking to other people from and we'll use Krav Maga as an example, they're not getting taught this. And it's interesting you're saying this because this is the same concept that I have. I quite often will bring up these types of things with my students. We'll discuss them. We have our own group page on Facebook where I post a lot of information about this type of stuff, about what's happening in the world. Because as I say to my students all the time, you know, when you think about what Krav Maga is, where it came from, what it's designed to be, it's a holistic approach to self-preservation. It's not just the physical aspect. And if you don't have that, you know, that's why the tactical preparation. And to me, tactical preparation is understanding the areas that you're operating, the actual country you're going to. You know, what are the threats? What are some of the historical problems they've had there? Like you said before about Thailand, it's interesting because when that coup happened, you know, I brought that up with my students and talked the same thing. What happens if you're in a country and you can't get to the airport? I was in the Philippines several years ago, and we were on the way to the airport to go to another part of the Philippines, and we couldn't get through. They'd actually, the government, all the police and the military had sealed off around the area, about 10 k's out. So we actually had to then get out of the taxi, put our backpacks on, and go by foot to go in towards the to the airport. It was because of the IPAC. I think one of the foreign leaders was flying in, so they shut the whole airport down. Yeah. So we had to get off and then go by foot to get to the actual airport in time. So I say to my students, you know, you've got to prepare for this type of contingency. And if you don't have these backup plans and you don't have this understanding, then you're really not training in true Krav Maga as far as I'm concerned, in real Krav Maga.
Yeah, and and I occasionally, because Vancouver's quite left-wing, I generally don't attract those types of individuals. So it's good for my mental well-being. But occasionally I'll get a student that comes in and I'll be talking about something like this and they get really upset because they're like, well, this is not what I signed up for. I'm like, well, what did you sign up for? And it's, you know, like the fitness style Krav Maga. They just want to get a sweat. I didn't come here. I don't want to think about anything. And I'm like, Krav Maga is, you need to think. If you don't, I don't think it's really Krav Maga. And
that's it, man.
Very upset when you start talking about things that they think is not related to self-defense. But I'm like, it is, because we're in this world and everything is interconnected and it's complicated. And as you said, most people have their head in the sand and they don't want to know. And to me, I'm just like, well, it's totally fine if you disagree with me. I just ask if you disagree with me that you don't make a scene in class. You can discuss outside of class. But as long as you're willing to listen, because I know a lot of what I'm saying, they haven't heard. Right? Like I finished my associate's degree in psychology. And I actually started it and did 2 or 3 years, and then I just stopped. I was going for my bachelor's, and I just stopped because I couldn't handle what I would consider brainwashing in the education system to just believe unrealistic nonsense on the left of the political scale. And I, as an older individual with experience, not some young, bright-eyed 18-year-old. I was like, I can't deal with this shit. Like some of the things the professors are saying, I'm like, that's not true. And I went back this past year just to get enough credits to get my associates, just so I don't waste it. But it's just like people, I had other students that come in and say, I've never heard this perspective before. Like no one has ever told me in, the 20, 30 years I've been in, Canada, no one said this to me. And this is a problem that people don't want to get objectively, or you can call it subjective, whatever you want, but just a holistic view of whatever is going on. I
think you need to have that, mate. If you don't have that, then you're not really preparing yourself, for the possibilities of what could happen. And like I always remind my students, no matter where you are in the world, if somebody attacks you, they don't care about you. They don't care about your welfare. They don't care about, what injuries you sustained. They don't care about your loved ones. They don't care about the repercussions of what happens to you afterwards. They only care about themselves. Yeah. So if you don't have that idea, if you don't have that preparation, especially if you're traveling overseas, no matter where you are, you need to understand that there is a threat there still. You can be in the safest country in the world, but there's still a threat. And what's the potential threats? And if you don't have that kind of mindset that, hey, if somebody attacks me, just because I'm from Canada or from Australia doesn't mean they're going to say, oh, well, I'm not going to attack you because you're a tourist, you're a friendly guy, you're from a good country. They'll still kick the shit out of you, mate. They'll still stab you. They'll still bleed you. They'll still do whatever they want to do to you to get what they want, be it your body, be it your money, be it your possessions. They don't care. And quite often I'll hear people say, Australians are loved everywhere in the world. And we are loved everywhere in the world, everywhere we go. But there are also countries in the world where they don't like us because of our political reasons or our alliances with other countries or the way we do things or the way we live our life. So, they're more than happy to cut your head off or stab you or abduct you, whatever the case may be. Yeah. And and I guess for down here in Australia, mate, because we do have this kind of this happy-go-lucky attitude. We are friendly people, and we always have this kind of mindset. She'll be right, mate. No worries, no problems. No worries. Because of that, people tend to think that I don't need to learn self-defense. It's not going to happen to me. Yeah, it always happens to somebody else, mate, until it actually happens to the person. Yeah. So I always say to myself in my classes, I say, statistically, somebody in this room in the next 6 to 12 months will be confronted with violence. Yeah. And generally it does happen, mate. And I've had many occasions where, I had a lady once that she'd only done 3 classes and she was at the service station, the gas station, and a guy confronted her and was aggressive to her, and she basically did everything she'd been taught, and the guy backed off, and then she said to me afterwards, she said, wow, Paul, you've actually told me on my first class that statistically somebody in this class will be confronted with violence. Little did I ever think was going to happen to me. Yeah. So if we don't have if we don't emphasize that continuously, and there's a difference between being a paranoid or being a pessimistic person. I always say that I'm a realist. I just believe in the real world, and if there's a 1% chance it can happen, well, we'll prepare for that.
Yeah. Well, a large percentage of my students, male and female, have had things happen to them already, and that's why they choose to come. They do their research.
Definitely.
They're looking into it. And I'm sure that's the same for all martial arts.
Definitely.
But I just wish people learned it sooner so that they would be able to defend themselves. And on that note, it's like, actually, statistically, you're more likely to be assaulted, especially women, of course, by someone you know.
That's it. Yeah.
Stranger in a Western place, I should say, because of place. And that's the other thing about a lot of these stats. It's who's doing them. Western universities. It's like the bystander effect. Are you familiar with that?
People they'll get their iPhones out, mate, and just videotape, and don't get involved. Is that
basically, people won't get involved until someone else gets involved, and
that's it.
It's a phenomenon that seems to be heavily in the West. So who's done the research? Western universities. And I often use Israel as the example, is that they don't really have that. You can get 50% of people getting away because they're not capable But then the other 50% of people are going towards whatever the issue is because they are capable. And then say like China, actually a good example, is because of the legal and all this stuff, people don't want to get involved at all. Someone was telling me it's one of the suburbs here, actually where I grew up, is predominantly Chinese now. And they said, yeah, in that city ain't nobody going to come help you. But if I'm in more, Western neighborhood, someone's more likely to get involved. Like, hey, you hooligan, get away from them or something.
Yeah.
I find that topic in the self-defense community is very taboo because nobody wants to be called racist. And I brought this up once someone else was teaching a seminar in Vancouver, a fairly well-known American gentleman. And I brought that up, culture and ethnic background regarding like violence. And he's like, everyone has the same blood. And it's like, well, yes, but
different mindset, huh?
Different mindsets in different areas. Like as a white male, do I want to be walking in Southside Chicago right now? Probably not.
No, probably not, mate. Wouldn't be healthy for you.
Yeah. Or even, one thing other people are South Africa. I don't want to go there without a gun on me personally if I was a white male by myself. But discussing this as part of self-defense is very uncomfortable for a lot of people because they'll get labeled one way or the other, and then you just get thrown under the bus. But that's the nature of it. Again, as we've been discussing, you got to know where you are. What's the culture? Is it a violent area? Right? It's not even. Honestly, it has more to do with socioeconomic status in many ways, as well as some culture. But people always want to make it about like skin color and race. But it's like, well, not specifically. No,
It's funny you say that, mate, because quite often I get called racist, but they don't know me. They don't know my personal relationship. They don't know the colour of the skin of my partner. They don't know, my background. And if they really did know my background, they'd be quite shocked. And they certainly wouldn't call me a racist. Yeah. And the thing is, but I think, as you said, people don't want to hear. They don't want to hear the truth, mate. In many cases, and everybody's entitled to an opinion, and you respect each other's opinion. But from a self-defense point of view, if you can't bring up these topics, because this is an important part of it too. And like I said to you earlier, mate, we teach our students what happens after the attack.
Yeah.
How do you respond after the attack? How do you deal with other people? How do you deal with people coming in a mob mentality? And I've experienced this myself many, many times, with the police, especially overseas in countries where there's large crowds gathering and there's this mob mentality. You can be standing there engaging with a threat, and then somebody that has nothing to do with the other person, nothing to do with you, they get that mob mentality and they'll just come in from the side and king hit you. And that can be anywhere in the world. Yeah. But discussing it with people say, oh, no, that won't happen. That won't happen. Well, it does happen. And then likewise, as you said, in China, for example, you can be bleeding out on the side of the road and 90% of people will walk past you, they'll look at you. Because culturally, it's not acceptable for them to do with it. Where here in Australia, traditionally, we look after each other. We back each other up. We look after our mates, so to speak. Even if we don't know the person, they're still our mate. We look after them. And but I've noticed that over probably the last decade, maybe the last 2 decades, that's slowly being erased too from our society, from our culture too. I think human nature is that if you see somebody hurt, you want to go and help them.
Yeah.
But I also think now, because of media and social media and all the crap going on in the world, mate, that people have a tendency to get their iPhone out and get it on YouTube as fast as they can, or on social media as fast as they can.
Yeah. Well, I tell people these days, like, now I've gotten involved in situations once in a while, but I'll only do it if I feel someone's life is at risk. And I've probably saved some people, but like, you don't always know nowadays, and it could be more disastrous. So there's that aspect. Yeah. Right? If the wrong person films it the wrong way and it goes sideways because you misread the situation, like domestic disputes are very difficult to deal with. If you're not sure what's going on, you jump in, both of them will stab you, for example. And I would say it's the uncertainty is so much higher nowadays because it's not just physical anymore. It's
No.
legal, it's complicated. And then, of course, the cultural difference, right? Everyone reacts differently to the same thing.
That's it.
And, you know, a story I like to tell is a few years ago, the UFC was here and I went. And of course, people are drinking. And on our way out, I have no idea what started it, but there was a big brawl. Of course, there's the big crowd surrounding it. And no security or police anywhere to be found, even though I know they're everywhere in the building. Yet this thing must have been going on for like 10 minutes. But when we got there, we just were like, hey, we're just going to walk in. Let's just see. And it was just me and someone else. And again, I have no idea what started it. We just saw this girl. This guy was fighting one guy, and this girl just sucker punched him in the back of the head. And he just, without thinking, turned around and hit her. Any guesses what happened?
Somebody comes in and hits him?
A girl sucker punched this guy in the back of the head who was probably fighting her boyfriend. The crowd, people who weren't even involved, like 5 or 10 guys jumped in, said, hey, you can't hit a girl, motherfucker, and then almost killed him.
Yeah.
Because within 10 seconds, they had him knocked out. And that's when we just jumped in and to stop him from getting his head kicked in. And you see these people scatter like cockroaches when you turn the light on, because those people who did that to this guy weren't even involved in the initial fight, right?
That's it.
They just saw their opportunity. Oh, he hit a girl. Well, hey, man, she sucker punched him in the back of the head. It's fair game. But their mentality was like, oh, you can't do that. But they were just looking for blood, jumping in. And so it can be very dangerous, because if you live in a society where it's homogenous, you know the rules, how people are going to react.
Yes.
But now with all this multiculturalism, nothing wrong with this, but it's just, if there's no unifying culture, it's very hard to predict, especially in a group setting, how people are going to react. And I think the social media aside, that's a big part of the reason why people don't want to get involved. It's just too many unknowns now.
That's it. Yeah. 100%, mate. Yeah. That's probably the big downfall of our society now, is that people are reluctant to help other people out. And, you know, they see people in harm, they'll either walk away, they'll either get their phone out and start videoing, or they're reluctant to go hands-on. And be it over a self-defense situation or even a medical emergency, people are just reluctant now to get involved, and which is sad. It's a sad, indication of society in itself. And for myself personally, I don't know, maybe I'm old school, but I still will get involved if it's a self-defense situation, if it's a medical situation. I'll still go in, obviously assess the situation, do a quick risk analysis, but I will still go and get involved, because, and I had a recent example, mate, where I was in a car park and I hopped in my car, and all of a sudden I heard this screaming, shouting, and all this abuse and that. And I looked in my rear vision mirror, and there was these 2 guys. It was a car park rage incident, and 2 guys were about to start going, hands on. And I jumped out of my car and I just went straight over towards them and started, trying to de-escalate the situation. And they were, abusing each other, screaming at each other. And I was expecting one of them in particular to turn on me. And but I was prepared for that. And I just started to try to de-escalate and try to make them see reason. I said, come on, guys, just settle down, stop this. What's going on? And I was able to actually de-escalate it to the point where I got them both thinking. I said to them, there's only 2 things that are going to happen here today. Somebody's going to get knocked on the ground. You're going to hit your head on the ground. You're going to the hospital. The other person's going to go to jail. That's the only outcome. The only other possible outcome is just to turn around, walk away, and you go home safe to your family.
Yeah.
And I was able to, and they were pretty big boys, mate. They were, they were young, and one was really buffed up, and they were aggressive towards each other. And I was able to diffuse it, and they both walked off. Yeah. And one of them, as they both walked off, one actually said, thanks, mate, I appreciate that. And as the other guy was driving off, he was probably the main instigator. I just pulled him over, and I said to him, I said, did you know that guy had a knife? And he looked at me, he goes, no. I said, well, nor did I. But what would happen if he had have had a knife and he put it in your chest? You wouldn't be going home to your loved ones today, mate. You could be dead. Is it worth it?
Yeah.
And he goes, oh, shit. He said, it's shit, man. He said, did he have a knife? I said, I think he might have.
Yeah.
And I said to him, because I expect that 8 out of every 10 people that I confront on the street is going to be armed with the blade. I said, I don't know if he did, mate, and you don't know if he did, but he could have. Was it worth it? And it got him thinking. He said, oh, thanks, mate. I really appreciate that. It just that opportunity to be able to maybe put something in the back of plant a seed in the back of their mind that, in the future, they won't be too quick to start wanting to fight people.
For sure. That's Krav Maga. Assume they have a weapon, and people just don't
100%.
think about that nowadays in a lot of cases. And it's like
they don't
know, especially certain cultures are going to be more likely to.
Definitely.
Here in the Philippines, that pretty much everyone's carrying something, and then
definitely
here not so much. I mean, you can carry knives here, but I don't even need something like that. It could be anything, So people over, there's this article that goes, it's a spoof article. It goes around on the internet every so often. It's like the average male overestimates their ability to fight by 4,000%, It's pretty funny read if you ever see it. And it just shows up every few years. And it's that ego again. I think people don't want to address that and realize that, it's complicated. It's not just I punch him, they punch me. Oh, their weapon comes out. And then it's very, people just are, I think in many ways, in the West, for sure, we're actually, because it's so safe, relatively, people just don't even think about it, compared to places, and it's hard to re-educate on people on that. I think sometimes.
See, we have a growing knife culture here, mate. We do.
Yeah,
we have a big knife culture here, and and even young children, mate, are carrying blades here. There's a lot of stabbings here. There's a massive increase of stabbings here in Australia.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating and highly likely in any country with stricter gun laws. When the tensions rise, you're going to start to see that. I think it almost like everywhere, every culture. Oh, I don't have guns. Oh, okay. There's tensions rising for whatever the reason. People are going to start carrying. Again, in the States, I heard these stories from people who are gun people, and they're all of a sudden, with all these riots going on, all of a sudden gun sales are through the roof, and it's actually the Democrat voters who are going out and buying guns now. They were anti-gun before. They're the first ones to go buy guns. I've heard this from people. It's because no matter what your political belief, no matter where you stand, your culture, you're human, and you want to protect yourself in the end of the day. And so guns are one of the easier ways because, as you know, most people don't want to spend the 10, 20 years developing their martial arts skills. So guns are the option, but without guns, it's going to be knives. Right.
That's it. And
I prefer a staff or like a stick or a baton, because it avoids the accidental killing more often than, say, a knife. But, people are going to draw towards knives or guns or something of that nature, given violent tensions, like almost without.
Yeah. I think also too, mate, like I often thought about this, do they carry more knives here because of the gun, there's lack of firearms? And there might be merit in that, but I also think a large percentage of the reasons, mate, is because they're easily accessible. Social media, movies, cultural, because we've got people here from other cultures that come to Australia. They've got a knife culture where they come from, be it from the African countries or Asia Pacific regions. But I also think it's also, mate, that there's this knowledge on the street that young people know that other young people are carrying blades, so they will arm themselves with a blade purely for the reason of self-defense. And there's been some really tragic cases here, over the last 20 years, but in particular the last 12 months, there's been some really tragic cases here of young kids, young people dying because of stabbings.
Yeah.
And it's a culture now that, and I talk to my friends and my students that are still serving police officers, and I always work on this theory that I believe from my own experience that 8 out of every 10 people that confront me on the street with violence will potentially be carrying a blade. And I asked my police officers, friends and students there, and they agree with that. They agree with that. To the point where you got 13-year-old kids here carrying blades, pulling a blade at a copper, at a police officer, and not hesitating at all, mate. Not having any concerns. It is, mate. It's pretty bad. But that's why I always say to my students, don't be put off by the fact that some 13-year-old kid, because a 13-year-old kid can look the same size as me, 6 foot, 100 kilograms. A 13-year-old kid, no matter how big or small they are, even if they're 13, they've still got the means, they've still got the mindset. They want to stab you, they'll stab you. So even if that child is smaller than you and they're threatening you, you've got to have the mindset that kid potentially could pull a blade on you and stab you.
Yeah.
And if you're not prepared for that, then you're not preparing yourself properly.
Yeah. And that's something that doesn't, like, the fact that the younger generation think it's totally acceptable to assault police officers and not have any repercussions, I think it's crazy.
It is crazy, mate. But one of my senior students here, he's just recently retired. He showed me a video footage of him going hands-on one night with a kid who was 13. Yeah. And he showed me the photographs of the blade, the knife this kid was carrying. And the kid had no hesitation of using it against him. No hesitation at all. So, we have to prepare our students for the possibility that, everybody assumes it's going to be a male. They're going to be a big guy. They might be tattooed, and that's the person that's going to attack you. But they don't train their students for a 13-year-old kid.
Yeah.
A 13-year-old kid has got pimples on his face, but he's got the attitude that he's going to still kill you.
Yeah, I always will say it's often that little guy in the back that's very angry, that's going to jump through and stab you while their big friend is holding you down, right? So
definitely, mate, definitely, 100%. And I think if we don't teach our students this way of thinking, then we're not preparing them properly.
Yeah, I agree. I actually got to get going in a second. So I think
problems, mate.
A good place to end it, that our job as Krav Maga instructors, or Bujikan in your case, to prepare your students for the worst and make them as best mentally and physically prepared. Now, if anyone wants to come train with you in Australia, what's the best way to reach you?
No problems, mate. They can get onto our Facebook page, which is Street Edge Krav Maga International. And look, anybody that wants to contact me, just have a chat or just ask questions, mate, I'm more than happy to answer any questions or give advice or, help out in any way I can. Just get onto our Facebook page, Street Edge Krav Maga International. Send me a message and be more than happy to get back to you and have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with Paul's crazy, awesome pedigree, if you're in Australia, take out chance opportunity to train with them. Thanks for coming on, and look forward to staying in touch this time a little better.
Definitely, mate. Yeah, no, thank you very much. It's been great to be on today, mate, and stay safe, buddy, and I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon, mate.
All right. Have a good evening.
You too, buddy. Stay safe.